A poor 12-year-old black girl saved a millionaire man during flight, but what he whispered made her cry. "Don't you die on me?" Zora's small hands trembled as she pressed them against the chest of the unconscious man sprawled across 3 first-class seats. The plane lurched violently to the right, sending an empty oxygen mask swinging like a pendulum above her head. Panic erupted throughout the cabin, screams, prayers, the sound of luggage tumbling from overhead bins, but Zora heard none of it. Her entire world had narrowed to the ashen face of Richard Harrington, the cold, distant millionaire who had barely acknowledged her existence when she'd boarded Flight 2187 just 3 hours earlier. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she continued compressions. "You can't die without telling me why. Why did you have that photo? Why were you watching me?" 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, as the aircraft battled through the worst turbulence the pilot had seen in 27 years of flying, a 12-year-old girl from the poorest neighborhood in Baltimore fought to save the life of a man worth more than her entire community combined. She had no idea that his next words, if he lived to speak them, would shatter everything she thought she knew about herself. If you're watching this story unfold right now, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in this extraordinary true story of fate, prejudice, and redemption that changed 2 lives forever. 3 hours earlier, Zora Williams clutched her backpack tightly against her chest as she shuffled down the narrow aisle of the Boeing 777. Each step deeper into the plane's cabin felt like entering an alien world. The soft blue lighting, the hushed conversations in languages she couldn't identify, the flight attendants with their perfect smiles and crisp uniforms. All of it was so far removed from her daily life in East Baltimore that she might as well have been walking on the moon. "Excuse me, honey." A flight attendant with a nameplate reading Patricia touched Zora's shoulder. "Are you traveling alone?" Zora nodded, her throat suddenly too dry to speak. The woman's eyes softened with a mix of concern and something else. Was it pity? Zora had seen that look countless times before, especially since Grandma Mie had gotten sick. "Let me see your boarding pass." Patricia extended her hand, her red nails gleaming under the cabin lights. She studied the slip of paper and raised an eyebrow. "Seat 14A, that's right this way, sweetie." As they moved past the curtains separating first class from economy, Zora couldn't help but glance at the passengers in the premium section. Most were absorbed in laptops or reclining with eye masks already in place, but one man caught her attention. Unlike the others, he wasn't working or sleeping. Instead, he sat perfectly still, staring out the window with such intensity that Zora wondered if he could see something no one else could. He was older, maybe in his early 60s, with silver hair that contrasted sharply with his tailored black suit. A heavy gold watch peeked from beneath his starched cuff, and a leather briefcase sat securely between his polished shoes. Everything about him radiated power and wealth, yet there was something in his expression, a flicker of something that seemed out of place. Vulnerability, regret. Before Zora could decide, he turned and met her gaze. For one electric moment, their eyes locked. The man's expression shifted from surprise to confusion to something Zora couldn't quite name. Then, as suddenly as it had happened, he looked away, his face hardening into a mask of indifference. "Sir, can I get you anything before takeoff?" A different flight attendant had appeared at his side. "Just privacy," the man replied, his voice as cold as his expression. Patricia guided Zora onward, but something about that brief exchange left her feeling unsettled. Why had he looked at her that way? Like he'd seen a ghost. "Here you are, honey. 14A, Patricia gestured to a window seat. "It's not too crowded today, so you've got the whole row to yourself. Lucky you." Zora slid into her seat, grateful for the small mercy of extra space. This flight, her first ever, wasn't something she'd planned or saved for. It had arrived in the form of a certified letter 3 weeks ago, along with a pre-purchased ticket and a brief, cryptic note. "Your presence is requested in London regarding an inheritance matter. All expenses paid. Discretion advised." Grandma Mie had been suspicious immediately. "Sounds like one of those scams that's always on the news," she'd said, her voice raspy from years of cigarettes, and more recently, the treatments that left her too weak to get out of bed most days. "Nobody leaves money to folks they don't know." But the letter had included details, specific details about Zora's father that only someone who knew him could have known. Her father, James Williams, who had died when Zora was just 4 years old. A man she remembered more as a feeling than a face. Warm hands, a rumbling laugh, the smell of peppermint and motor oil. And so, after weeks of debate, multiple calls to the London law firm listed on the letterhead, Blackwell, Henderson and Associates, serving distinguished clientele since 1972, and a visit from a notary who verified that, yes, this was legitimate, Grandmamie had reluctantly agreed to let Zora make the journey. "Just be careful," she'd warned as the medical transport prepared to take her back to the hospital for another round of treatments. "The world ain't always kind to girls who look like you, especially when they're alone." Those words echoed in Zora's mind as the plane began to taxi. She was 12 years old, flying across an ocean to meet strangers who claimed she was entitled to something left by someone connected to her father. It sounded like the beginning of one of the mystery novels she devoured by the dozen, borrowed from the mobile library that visited her neighborhood every other Thursday. Except this wasn't fiction. This was her life, suddenly taking a turn she never could have imagined. The engines roared to life, pressing Zora back against her seat. She closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. Whatever awaited her in London, she would face it with the same determination that had gotten her through everything else. Her father's death, her mother's disappearance 3 years later, the challenges of being raised by a grandmother whose love was as fierce as her health was fragile. As the plane lifted off the ground, Zora felt a curious mixture of fear and hope. For the first time in her young life, she was leaving behind everything familiar. The worn brownstone with its perpetually leaking faucet. The corner store where Mr. Jin sometimes slipped her an extra candy bar for being such a good student. The community center where she spent afternoons when Grandmamie had doctor appointments. Her school where teachers alternately praised her intelligence and lamented her attitude problem when she questioned their low expectations. But there was freedom in this departure, too. For a few precious days, she would be more than that poor Williams girl or the kid with no parents. She would be a traveler, an adventurer, someone with a mysterious appointment in a foreign city. The thought made her smile despite her nervousness. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Around her, passengers began to settle in for the 7-hour journey. Some pulled out tablets or books, others adjusted travel pillows or requested drinks from the flight attendants now moving through the cabin. Zora reached into her backpack and removed the book she'd brought for the flight, a dog-eared copy of The Secret Garden that had belonged to her father. It was one of the few things of his that she possessed, and its pages were filled with his handwritten notes in the margins. Sometimes, when she missed him most acutely, she would read those notes and imagine him reading the same words, sitting in the same spots she did, his thoughts reaching across time to connect with hers. She was just opening to her bookmarked page when a commotion from first class caught her attention. The man who had stared at her, the one with the silver hair and expensive suit, was standing now, his voice raised in evident displeasure. "This is unacceptable," he was saying to a harried-looking flight attendant. "I specifically requested a vacant seat beside me. I'm not accustomed to sharing my space with strangers." "I understand, Mr. Harrington," the attendant replied, her professional smile never wavering. "But I'm afraid with today's configuration, this is the best we can do. Mr. Chen is also a Platinum Elite member, and—" "Do you have any idea who I am?" The man, Mr. Harrington, apparently lowered his voice, but the intensity of his words carried back to where Zora sat. "One call from me to your corporate office, and—" "Richard, please," the second passenger, a middle-aged Asian man in a simple gray suit, spoke up. "If it's so important to you, I'm happy to move." "That's not the point, James," Harrington shook his head. "It's about respect for commitments made. When Transatlantic promises me something, I expect them to deliver." Zora couldn't help but roll her eyes. The problems of the wealthy never ceased to amaze her. Here was a man upset about having to sit next to someone in the most luxurious section of the plane, while she was grateful just to have a row to herself in economy. But there was something else about the exchange that nagged at her. The way Harrington had said the name, James, with a familiarity that suggested these weren't two strangers having an awkward encounter. And the other man, though outwardly calm, held himself with a tension that spoke of complicated history. The situation resolved itself when a flight attendant escorted James Chen to a different seat in first class, leaving Harrington to his coveted isolation. As he sat back down, his gaze swept the cabin, and for the second time, connected with Zora's. This time, she didn't look away. Something about his entitlement, his coldness, made her want to challenge him. She held his stare until, surprisingly, it was he who broke the connection, turning abruptly to speak to a flight attendant. Zora returned to her book, but the words blurred before her eyes. Her mind kept returning to Harrington's face in that moment of eye contact, not the arrogance or irritation he displayed during the seating dispute, but something altogether different. For just an instant, she could have sworn she saw recognition. But that was impossible. What would a man like Richard Harrington, who complained about the proximity of other first-class passengers, know of a girl from East Baltimore who wore second-hand clothes and had never been on a plane before today? The thought was so preposterous that she almost laughed aloud. Clearly, the excitement of the journey was making her imagination work overtime. She forced herself to focus on her book, losing herself in the story of another orphaned girl finding her way in an unfamiliar world. An hour into the flight, as the flight attendants began serving drinks, Zora noticed Harrington standing again. This time, he moved with purpose toward the lavatory at the front of the first-class cabin. As he passed by the dividing curtain, something fell from his jacket pocket, a small, folded piece of paper that fluttered to the floor just on the economy side of the partition. Without thinking, Zora unbuckled her seatbelt and slipped into the aisle. She picked up the paper, intending to return it. Perhaps it was important, a business card, a receipt, a note. As she straightened, holding the folded square, a strange impulse overcame her. Later, she would question why she did it, what instinct had prompted her to cross a line she knew was wrong. But in that moment, standing alone in the aisle with no one watching, she carefully unfolded the paper. It wasn't a business card or a receipt. It was a photograph, worn at the creases as if it had been folded and unfolded countless times. The image showed a young black couple standing before a modest house, their arms around each other, both smiling broadly at the camera. The woman was petite with close-cropped hair and a dimple in her right cheek. The man was tall and lean, wearing faded jeans and a Howard University t-shirt. Zora's heart stopped. She knew that dimple. She saw it in her own reflection every day, and the man, there was no mistaking him, it was her father. Her hands began to tremble so violently that she nearly dropped the photo. Why would Richard Harrington, a white millionaire businessman, be carrying a picture of her parents? The couple in the photo looked young, probably in their early 20s, suggesting the picture had been taken years before Zora was born, before her father died, before her mother vanished. The lavatory door opened. Zora quickly refolded the photo and stepped back toward her seat, her mind racing. Harrington emerged, his expression troubled. For a moment he paused, patting his pockets as if searching for something. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the floor. Zora slid back into her seat, the photo clutched in her trembling hand. She should return it, she knew that. But how could she explain having looked at it? And more importantly, how could she give it back without asking the question now burning in her mind? How did you know my parents? She watched as Harrington returned to his seat, still patting his pockets with increasing agitation. He signaled to a flight attendant, and soon several crew members were discreetly searching the first-class cabin floor. Zora's heart pounded against her ribs. She felt like a thief, though what she'd stolen wasn't the photo itself, but the knowledge of its existence, knowledge that connected her, somehow, to this cold, wealthy stranger. As the search continued fruitlessly in first class, Zora made a decision. She would return the photo, but not yet. First, she needed to understand why Harrington had it. Was this connected to the mysterious inheritance she was traveling to London to discuss? Was Harrington himself involved in whatever had prompted that cryptic letter? She carefully placed the photo inside her copy of The Secret Garden, marking the spot where she'd been reading. Whatever this meant, she needed time to process it, to think through her next steps. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, causing the cabin to shudder. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a chime. Around her, passengers reached for their drinks and secured loose items. Zora buckled her seatbelt mechanically, her thoughts still consumed by the discovery. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking," a calm voice announced over the intercom. "We're experiencing some light turbulence as we pass through a weather system. I've turned on the seatbelt sign as a precaution. Our flight attendants will temporarily suspend service until we reach smoother air. We anticipate this should only last about 15 minutes. Thank you for your patience." The turbulence intensified, the plane dipping and rising like a boat on rough waters. Zora gripped the armrests, her stomach lurching with each drop. She had never experienced anything like this, had no frame of reference for the sensation of being suspended in air at the mercy of invisible currents. For the first time since boarding, she felt a flash of real fear, not about the photo or Harrington, but about the fundamental vulnerability of hurtling through the sky in a metal tube thousands of feet above the earth. "It's perfectly normal," said a gentle voice beside her. Zora turned to find an elderly woman had taken the aisle seat in her row, a passenger who must have moved during the drink service when Zora was distracted by the photo. "I've been flying since the 70s, the woman continued, her southern accent as comforting as a warm blanket. "Back when smoking was allowed and they served real food on china plates, a little bumpy air is nothing to worry about." The woman had silver-gray hair styled in a neat bob, and she wore a matching lavender sweater set that reminded Zora of something Grandma me might wear to church. Her liver-spotted hands were adorned with several rings, including a wedding band that looked too large for her slender finger. "I'm Dorothea, by the way, Dorothea Jackson." She offered Zora a peppermint from a small tin. "These help with the ear pressure and settle the stomach, too." "Thanks," Zora accepted the candy. "I'm Zora Williams." "First flight?" Dorothea asked knowingly. Zora nodded, slightly embarrassed at how obvious her nervousness must be. "Well, you picked a beautiful day for it. Once we get above these clouds, the view is going to be spectacular." Dorothea patted Zora's hand. "Are you traveling to London for pleasure or business?" The question made Zora pause. How could she explain her situation to a stranger? It sounded implausible even to her own ears. "It's complicated," she finally said. "Sort of family business, I guess." "Ah," Dorothea nodded sagely. "Family business often is complicated. I'm visiting my son and his husband. They moved to London 5 years ago for his work. He's in finance, very successful, and they've been after me to visit ever since. Finally decided to take the plunge for my 75th birthday next week." "Happy early birthday," Zora said, grateful for the distraction from both the turbulence and her troubled thoughts. "Thank you, sweetheart. You know, you remind me of my granddaughter. She's a bit older, 17 now, but she has that same look in her eyes, like she's taking in everything, missing nothing." Dorothea's gaze was shrewd despite her grandmotherly appearance. That kind of awareness serves a person well in this world, especially when they have to grow up faster than they should. There was something in the way she said it, not with pity but with recognition, that made Zora feel seen in a way few adults ever saw her. It was both comforting and unsettling. The plane steadied as they climbed above the weather system. Sunshine streamed through the windows, transforming the cabin from its artificial dimness to a space filled with natural light. The seatbelt sign dinged off again. "What did I tell you?" Dorothea gestured to the window. "Spectacular." Zora looked out to see an endless expanse of fluffy white clouds stretching to the horizon, gilded by sunlight. It was like a landscape from another world, pristine, peaceful, impossibly beautiful. For a moment she forgot about Harrington, the photo, the mysterious inheritance. She was simply a girl experiencing the magic of flight for the first time, sharing it with a kind stranger who treated her like a person worth knowing. The moment was shattered by a commotion from first class. Raised voices, the sound of movement, a flight attendant rushing forward with purpose. Zora couldn't see what was happening, but she could feel the shift in energy throughout the cabin as passengers craned their necks and whispered to one another. "Excuse me," Dorothea flagged down a passing flight attendant. "Is everything all right up front?" "Just a passenger feeling unwell," the young man replied with practiced reassurance. "Nothing to worry about." But his tight expression and the way he hurried back toward first class told a different story. Something serious was happening, and the crew was trying to manage it without alarming the other passengers. Zora's thoughts immediately went to Harrington. She didn't know why. There were dozens of other passengers in first class, but somehow she was certain he was at the center of whatever was unfolding. Was it possible? Was this connected to the photo, to her parents, to her presence on this flight? The irrational thought that she had somehow caused this through her discovery of the photo flashed through her mind. She shook it off. That was magical thinking, the kind grandma me gently discouraged when Zora was younger, and believed she could influence events through ritual or thought alone. "I should see if they need help," Dorothea said suddenly, unbuckling her seatbelt. "I was a nurse for 47 years before I retired, and critical care." "Ma'am, please remain seated." The flight attendant who had spoken to them earlier reappeared. "We have the situation under control." "Young man," Dorothea fixed him with a look that brooked no argument, "I've been handling medical emergencies since before you were born. Now is it a cardiac event, seizure, allergic reaction?" The flight attendant hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the potential value of professional medical assistance. "Sir," another flight attendant called from the front of the economy section, "we need that medical kit now." That settled it. The first attendant hurried to retrieve the kit while Dorothea, with surprising agility for her age, moved toward first class. Without conscious decision, Zora found herself following. Something pulled her forward, curiosity, concern, or perhaps a deeper instinct connected to the photo still hidden in her book. "Zora, honey, stay in your seat," Dorothea called over her shoulder. But Zora couldn't. Whatever was happening, she felt compelled to witness it. As they reached the partition between cabins, the scene in first class became visible. A cluster of people surrounded a single seat, Harrington's seat. The businessman was slumped forward, his face ashen, his breathing labored. James Chen, the passenger he'd earlier objected to sitting beside, was supporting him while a flight attendant held an oxygen mask to his face. "Possible cardiac event," someone was saying. "Does anyone have aspirin?" "Sir, can you hear me?" Another attendant was speaking directly to Harrington, who seemed only semi-conscious. "Mr. Harrington, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand." Dorothea stepped forward with the authority of decades in medicine. "I'm a registered nurse. Let me through, please." The crew made way for her immediately, relief evident on their faces. As she bent to examine Harrington, his eyes fluttered open. For a moment he seemed disoriented, his gaze unfocused. Then his attention sharpened, moving past Dorothea to where Zora stood at the edge of the gathering. Recognition flashed across his features, followed by something that looked like desperation. His lips moved beneath the oxygen mask, forming words Zora couldn't hear. He struggled to sit up, reaching toward her with a trembling hand. "Sir, please remain still," Dorothea instructed, gently but firmly pressing him back against the seat. "You need to stay calm." But Harrington's eyes remained fixed on Zora, intense and pleading. He pulled the oxygen mask aside. "The photo," he gasped, his voice barely audible. "Please." A flight attendant replaced the mask, but not before Zora heard those words. A confirmation that whatever medical crisis Harrington was experiencing, it was somehow connected to the image she'd found. The image of her parents. "What photo?" Dorothea asked, checking Harrington's pulse at his wrist. He shook his head weakly, still staring at Zora with that strange, desperate expression. "Young lady," James Chen addressed Zora directly, "do you know what he's talking about?" All eyes turned to her. She felt frozen in place, caught between truth and self-preservation. If she admitted to having the photo, she would have to explain how she'd obtained it, by taking something that wasn't hers, by looking at something private. But if she denied it, she might be withholding something important to a man in medical distress. Before she could decide, the plane lurched violently. The turbulence they'd experienced earlier returned with greater intensity, sending those standing stumbling into seats and each other. The cabin lights flickered. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments throughout the plane, dangling like bizarre fruits. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," the intercom crackled. "We've encountered severe turbulence. All passengers and crew must return to their seats immediately and fasten their seatbelts. I repeat, return to your seats immediately." The urgency in the captain's voice was unmistakable. This was not a routine announcement. Whatever they had flown into was serious. The flight attendants began ushering people back to their assigned seats, their movements efficient despite the rocking of the cabin. Dorothea spoke rapidly to the crew about Harrington's condition before reluctantly heading back toward economy. "Come on, Zora," she said, taking the girl's arm. "We need to sit down." But as they turned to go, Harrington lunged forward, grabbing Zora's wrist with surprising strength for someone in his condition. "Wait," he wheezed, the oxygen mask askew. Please, important. Sir, you need to let her go and put your mask back on. A flight attendant insisted, trying to separate them. Harrington's grip tightened. His eyes, bloodshot and desperate, bored into Zora's. James and Eliza, he said, the names sending a shock through her system, her parents' names. You're their daughter, I need to. Whatever he needed, Zora didn't hear it. The plane dropped suddenly as if the floor had vanished beneath them. For a sickening moment, they were in free fall. Passengers screamed. Unsecured items flew through the cabin. Then, with a bone-jarring jolt, they stabilized, though the violent shaking continued. In the chaos, Harrington's grip had broken. The flight attendants were now frantically securing him in his seat, strapping the oxygen mask properly to his face. Dorothea pulled Zora back toward economy, moving as quickly as possible while maintaining her balance in the turbulent conditions. "Seat belt, now!" Dorothea's nurse's voice brooked no argument as they reached their row. Zora complied mechanically, her mind reeling not from the physical turbulence but from Harrington's words. He knew her parents. He recognized her as their daughter, and whatever he needed to tell her seemed vitally important to him, important enough that even in a medical crisis, even as the plane bucked and shuddered around them, it was his primary concern. The cabin lights failed completely for several seconds before emergency lighting activated, bathing everything in an eerie blue glow. Oxygen masks swayed above every seat. The plane seemed to be fighting its way through something massive and hostile. "Is this normal?" Zora asked, her voice small against the cacophony of creaking metal and frightened voices. Dorothea's hand found hers in the dim light, squeezing reassuringly. "No, honey, it's not, but these planes are built to withstand much worse. We're going to be fine." Her calm certainty was a lifeline in the chaos. Zora clung to it, trying to steady her breathing as the plane continued its violent passage through the storm. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice returned, noticeably more tense than before, "we are diverting to Gander International Airport in Newfoundland due to both the severe weather conditions and a medical emergency on board. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. Our estimated landing time is approximately 40 minutes. Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Newfoundland? They weren't even halfway to London. Whatever was happening to Harrington was serious enough, combined with the weather, to force an emergency landing. Zora thought of the photo in her book, of the names he had spoken, of the recognition in his eyes when he saw her. None of it made sense, yet all of it seemed connected to the mysterious summons that had put her on this flight in the first place. The next 30 minutes were the longest of Zora's young life. The turbulence gradually subsided as the plane descended to a lower altitude, but the tension in the cabin remained palpable. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, checking on passengers and offering reassurance where needed. Several times, they hurried to first class with equipment from the medical kit, their expressions growing more concerned with each trip. Beside her, Dorothea maintained a calm exterior, though Zora noticed she was clutching her crucifix necklace and moving her lips in silent prayer. Outside the windows, the pristine white landscape of clouds had given way to a menacing gray mass that obscured any view of the earth below. "Is Mr. Harrington going to be okay?" Zora finally asked, breaking the silence between them. Dorothea looked at her curiously. "You know him?" "No," Zora admitted, "but he knew my parents somehow." The older woman's eyebrows rose. "Is that what he was trying to tell you?" Zora nodded, then hesitated. Should she mention the photo, the mysterious letter that had brought her on this journey? Before she could decide, the captain's voice returned. "We are beginning our final descent into Gander. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin." The announcement was followed by instructions about proper landing positions in case of emergency. Though delivered in the same professional tone as all previous communications, the very fact that they were being given heightened the sense that this was not a routine situation. As the plane broke through the cloud cover, Zora caught her first glimpse of land since leaving Baltimore, a vast expanse of green and brown, dotted with lakes that reflected the gray sky above. In the distance, she could make out what must be the airport, a cluster of buildings and runways carved out of the wilderness. The descent was steep and fast, suggesting urgency beyond the standard procedures for an unscheduled landing. Zora's ears popped painfully despite the peppermint Dorothea had given her. The cabin remained eerily quiet, passengers too tense for conversation, many clutching armrests or each other's hands as they approached the runway. The landing itself was rougher than Zora had expected, the plane bouncing once before its wheels firmly gripped the tarmac. The engines roared as they reversed thrust, the deceleration pressing everyone forward against their seatbelts. Outside, rain lashed the windows, blurring the view of emergency vehicles already positioned along the runway, their lights flashing through the gloom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed at Gander International Airport," the captain announced, his relief evident even through the professional veneer. "Local time is 2:17 p.m. Medical personnel are boarding to attend to our passenger requiring assistance. All other passengers, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until further instructions." Almost immediately, the forward door opened. Cold air rushed into the cabin as paramedics boarded, directed quickly to first class by the flight attendants. Zora strained to see what was happening, but the partition blocked her view. "They're taking him off the plane," a passenger across the aisle reported, having a better angle. "He doesn't look good." Zora felt a sudden, irrational panic. If Harrington left the plane now, she might never learn what he knew about her parents, why he had their photo, what connection existed between them. Without thinking, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. "Zora," Dorothea reached for her. "You can't." But Zora was already moving, slipping into the aisle and pushing forward against the explicit instructions to remain seated. A flight attendant stepped into her path. "Miss, you need to return to your seat immediately." "Please," Zora said, desperation making her voice crack. "I need to talk to Mr. Harrington. It's important. It's about my parents." The attendant's expression softened slightly, but she stood firm. "I understand, but right now Mr. Harrington needs medical attention. The best thing you can do is stay seated until—" A commotion from first class interrupted her. Raised voices, urgent commands from the paramedics. Then, clear above the din, Harrington's voice, strained but insistent. "The girl, I need to speak to the girl." The flight attendant turned, her professional composure momentarily broken by surprise. One of the paramedics appeared at the partition. "Is there a young lady here?" he asked, scanning the economy cabin. "Mr. Harrington is asking for someone." "Me," Zora said, stepping forward. "He wants to talk to me." The paramedic looked skeptical. "You know this man?" "No, but—" Zora hesitated, then reached into her backpack and removed her book. From between its pages, she carefully extracted the photograph. "He dropped this. It's a picture of my parents." The paramedic studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Quickly, then, we need to get him to the hospital." Guided by the flight attendant, Zora moved into first class. Harrington was on a stretcher, an oxygen mask over his face, an IV already inserted into his arm. His skin had a grayish cast that even Zora, with no medical training, recognized as dangerous. But his eyes were alert, tracking her movement as she approached. "Sir," the paramedic said, "we really need to move you now." Harrington pulled the mask aside. "1 minute," he gasped. "Private." The paramedics exchanged glances with the flight crew. After a moment of silent communication, they stepped back slightly, giving Harrington and Zora a small bubble of relative privacy amidst the crisis. Zora moved closer to the stretcher, the photo clutched in her hand. "I found this when it fell from your pocket," she said quietly. "Why do you have a picture of my parents?" Harrington's breathing was labored, each word clearly an effort. "Not much time," he said. "Listen carefully." He gestured weakly for her to come closer. Zora leaned in until her ear was near his lips. The words he whispered were so soft she could barely hear them over the ambient noise of the plane and the medical equipment. But once she processed them, their impact hit her with physical force, making her jerk back, eyes wide with shock. "That's not possible," she said, her voice trembling. "You're lying." Harrington shook his head weakly. "Ask your grandmother. About July 17, 1992. She knows." His hand fumbled at his jacket pocket. "Take this, everything, explained inside, London lawyers will help." He pressed something into her palm, a small key on a plain metal ring. Before Zora could ask any more questions, his eyes rolled back, and alarms began sounding from the portable monitors attached to him. "He's crashing," one paramedic announced, pushing Zora aside. "We need to move now." In a blur of coordinated urgency, the paramedics lifted the stretcher and rushed Harrington from the plane. Zora stood frozen, the key clutched in one hand, the photo in the other, tears streaming down her face without her even realizing she was crying. What Harrington had whispered, those few, impossible words, had shattered the foundation of everything she believed about herself, her family, her very identity. If what he said was true, nothing would ever be the same again. A gentle hand on her shoulder broke through her shock. Dorothea stood beside her, concern evident in her wise eyes. "What did he say to you, child?" she asked softly. Zora looked at her, then at the key in her palm, then back at the open door through which Harrington had been rushed. The words he had whispered replayed in her mind, each syllable a seismic shift in her understanding of the world. "He said," Zora swallowed hard, hardly able to form the words, "he said he's my father." If you're finding this story compelling, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing you these extraordinary true stories of fate, prejudice, and unexpected connections. Drop a comment below sharing where you're watching from. The next hours passed in a fog of confusion and bureaucracy. Once the immediate crisis of Harrington's medical emergency had been addressed, the reality of an unscheduled international landing began to unfold. Passengers were deplaned and directed to a holding area in Gander's modest terminal, while arrangements were made for them to continue their journey, some on the same aircraft once it was cleared, others on different flights that would be routed to accommodate them. Zora sat apart from the crowd, the photo and key her only company as she tried to process Harrington's revelation. Richard Harrington, a white, wealthy businessman in his 60s, had claimed to be her father whom she had mourned since age 4. Her father, whose dark skin and warm brown eyes she had inherited. Her father, whose death certificate she had seen with her own eyes, whose grave she had visited every year on his birthday. It was impossible, absurd, and yet. She studied the photo again, searching for answers in the frozen smiles of the young couple. The man she had always believed was her father, James Williams, stood with his arm around the woman Zora knew was her mother, Eliza. They looked happy in love, their whole lives ahead of them. Nothing in the image suggested deception or complication. But there was the key, and there were Harrington's words. "Ask your grandmother about July 17, 1992. What had happened on that date? Zora had been born in March of 1993, roughly 8 months later. The timing sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the terminal's aggressive air conditioning. "Mind if I join you?" Dorothea stood before her, holding 2 cups of what smelled like hot chocolate. Zora nodded numbly, and the older woman settled beside her on the plastic airport seating. "Thought you could use this," Dorothea said, handing her one of the cups. "Sugar and warmth good for shock." Zora accepted the drink gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around the paper cup. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the controlled chaos of the terminal as airline staff attempted to manage the disrupted travel plans of nearly 300 passengers. "Want to talk about it?" Dorothea finally asked, her tone making it clear that no was an acceptable answer. Zora considered the question. She barely knew this woman, a chance seatmate on a disrupted flight. And yet Dorothea had shown her nothing but kindness, and there was something in her manner that invited confidence. More practically, Zora had no one else to talk to, and the thoughts swirling in her head threatened to drown her if not released. "I don't understand how it could be true," she said finally. "My father was black. I have pictures of him, memories even though I was young when he died. How could this white man possibly be my father?" Dorothea took a thoughtful sip of her hot chocolate before responding. "Family is complicated, honey, more complicated than most people like to admit. Sometimes there are secrets kept for all kinds of reasons, some protective, some selfish, some a mix of both. But if Richard Harrington is really my father, then who was James Williams? Why would my mother and grandmother lie to me my whole life?" "I can't answer that," Dorothea said gently. "But I can tell you this. In my 74 years, I've learned that most people aren't villains in their own stories. Whatever happened between your mother, the man you knew as your father, and this Harrington fellow, I'd bet they all thought they were doing the right thing at the time." Zora stared down at the photo. "My mom disappeared when I was 7, just left one day and never came back. Grandmommy says she had troubles, but she never explains what kind. If she lied about who my father was, what else did she lie about? The weight of these questions she had no way of answering in an airport terminal in Newfoundland, pressed down on her like a physical force. Tears threatened again, and she blinked them back fiercely. She had cried enough. "What are you going to do now?" Dorothea asked. Zora clutched the key in her palm. "I need to get to London. The lawyer's there. They must know something about all this. And then I need to talk to my grandmother." Before Dorothea could respond, an announcement came over the terminal's PA system. "Attention passengers of transatlantic flight 2187. We have arranged for a recovery aircraft to transport you to London Heathrow. Boarding will begin in approximately 1 hour. Please proceed to Gate 3 for pre-boarding procedures. We apologize for the inconvenience and thank you for your patience." A ripple of relief passed through the crowd of stranded travelers. Zora felt it too, but it was tempered by another concern. "What about Mr. Harrington?" she asked. Did they say anything about his condition?" Dorothea shook her head. "Not officially, but I spoke with one of the paramedics when they came back for some equipment they'd left on the plane. He said they took him to James Patton Memorial Hospital in Gander. That's all I know." Zora made a sudden decision. "I need to see him before we leave." "Honey, I don't think that's possible. The hospital is in town and we're due to board in an hour." "But what if he dies?" The words burst from Zora with unexpected force. "What if he dies and I never get answers, never find out if what he said is true, never learn why he had that photo or what happened with my mother?" The possibility that Harrington might die before she could question him properly hadn't fully registered until this moment. Whatever his relation to her, father, as he claimed, or something else entirely, he was her only link to understanding the mystery that had suddenly engulfed her life. Dorothea studied her with those kind, shrewd eyes. "Let me see what I can find out," she said after a moment. "Wait here." She rose and made her way to the airline staff desk, where she engaged in what appeared to be an earnest conversation with one of the agents. Zora watched anxiously, unable to hear what was being said but reading the body language, Dorothea's persuasive gestures, the agent's initial resistance, then a softening, a nod, the typing on a computer terminal. After several minutes, Dorothea returned, a small smile on her face. "Good news and bad news," she said. "The good news is that Mr. Harrington is stable. They've admitted him to the cardiac unit for observation and treatment, but he's conscious and in no immediate danger." Relief flooded through Zora, surprising her with its intensity. "And the bad news? There's simply no way for you to visit him before our flight leaves. The hospital is 20 minutes from here, and with security procedures for the new flight, there just isn't time." Zora's shoulders slumped. Though relieved that Harrington wasn't dying, the prospect of continuing to London without speaking to him again felt wrong. How could she face whatever awaited her there without more information? "But," Dorothea continued, "I did manage to get them to call the hospital. I told them you were family, a little white lie for a good cause. They're going to ask if Mr. Harrington can take a phone call from you before we board." Hope sparked within Zora. "Really, thank you." "Don't thank me yet. They need to check with his doctors first to make sure he's up to it, and even if he is, you'll only have a few minutes." Dorothea's expression grew serious. "Think carefully about what you want to ask him, Zora. Make those minutes count." Zora nodded, her mind already racing through the questions she needed answered. Was he really her father? How was that possible? What happened with her mother? Why had he never been part of her life? Why was she being summoned to London now? What did the key open? Too many questions for a brief phone call with a man recovering from a cardiac event. She would need to prioritize, to focus on what mattered most. As they waited for word from the hospital, Zora's thoughts turned to Grandma Mee. Should she call her? Tell her what had happened? What Harrington had claimed? The idea made her stomach clench with anxiety. If what Harrington said was true, her grandmother had participated in a lifelong deception. That conversation needed to happen face-to-face, not over an international phone line with airline announcements in the background. "Miss Williams," a staff member approached with a cordless phone. "We have Mr. Harrington for you." Zora's heart leapt into her throat. She accepted the phone with trembling hands, moving a short distance away for privacy. "Hello," she said, her voice smaller than she intended. "Zora," Harrington's voice was weak but clear. "Thank you for calling. Are you really my father? The question tumbled out before she could stop it, before she could consider a more strategic approach. A pause, then a sigh that seemed to carry decades of regret. Yes, biologically speaking, I am. The confirmation, stated so plainly, sent a wave of dizziness through her. She gripped the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. How my father, James Williams, he was black, I have his features. Everyone says I look just like him. James was a good man, Harrington said, his voice warming with what sounded like genuine respect. Your mother's colleague at first, then her friend, after. After what happened between your mother and me, James stepped in. He loved Eliza. When she found out she was pregnant, he offered to marry her to give the child, to give you, his name, his protection. But why would he do that? It was 1992, Zora. I was married, wealthy, white. Your mother was young, black, just starting her career. When our relationship ended badly, she was alone and vulnerable. James provided a solution that seemed best for everyone, especially for you. Zora struggled to process this information. The man she had called father her entire life had not been her biological parent, but had chosen to claim her anyway. The knowledge was both painful and precious. Did you even want me? The question emerged raw and unfiltered, giving voice to the hurt child within her. Harrington's response came after a long pause, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't know about you until after you were born. Eliza. She made a choice not to tell me. By the time I found out, she and James were married. You had his name, his love. You were part of a family that could give you what I couldn't then. And what about now? Why am I being called to London about an inheritance matter? Why were you on my flight? Why do you have a photo of my parents? The lawyers in London work for me, Harrington admitted. When I learned of your grandmother's illness, I realized it was time. Time for you to know the truth, to have choices I couldn't give you before. The inheritance is real. I've established a trust for you. Educational expenses, housing, whatever you need. The thought of this stranger, this man claiming to be her father, monitoring her life from a distance, knowing about Grandma Me's cancer, making financial arrangements for her future without her knowledge, sent a surge of anger through Zora. You've been watching me all this time. Not directly. I respected the boundaries Eliza and James established. But yes, I've known where you were. I made sure you were safe, that you had opportunities. I contributed anonymously to your school, to the community center you attend. It was the least I could do. The community center that had provided after-school care when Grandma Me was at her treatments. The school that had somehow found funding for the advanced math program Zora had qualified for despite budget cuts. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture of invisible influence stretching back years. And my mother, do you know where she is, why she left? Another heavy pause. Zora, I think that's a conversation better had in person when I'm recovered. It's complicated. Everything about this is complicated, Zora shot back, frustration mounting. I deserve to know the truth, all of it. You do, Harrington agreed quietly. And you will, but not like this, not over a rushed phone call in an airport. The key I gave you, it opens a safe deposit box at London's Barclay Bank Central Branch. Inside is a letter from your mother written before she left. It explains everything better than I can. A letter from her mother, written years ago but preserved, waiting for her. The thought sent a shiver through Zora, half dread, half desperate hope. Miss Williams, the airline staff member who had brought the phone, was gesturing to her. I'm sorry, but they're beginning the boarding process for your flight. We need to wrap up this call. Zora nodded her understanding before returning to the phone. I have to go. We're boarding. I understand. Harrington's voice had weakened, suggesting the conversation had taxed his limited strength. Zora, I know this is overwhelming. I know you're angry and confused. You have every right to be. But please go to London, meet with the lawyers, read your mother's letter. Then, if you're willing, I'd like a chance to explain in person. The announcement for priority boarding came over the terminal speakers, adding urgency to the moment. I need to think about all this, Zora said honestly. It's too much. Of course. There was resignation in Harrington's tone, but also something like hope. Whatever you decide, whatever you think of me after learning everything, I want you to know one thing. From the moment I learned of your existence, I have never stopped thinking about you, wishing things could have been different. The raw emotion in his voice caught Zora off guard. This cold, entitled man she had observed on the plane now sounded broken, vulnerable, human. It complicated her emerging anger, added shades of gray to what she wanted to see in simple black and white. "I have to go," she repeated, not knowing how else to respond. "Goodbye, Zora, be safe." She handed the phone back to the staff member, her mind whirling with new information and new questions. Dorothea waited nearby, concern evident in her expression. "How are you doing?" the older woman asked as they gathered their belongings and joined the boarding queue. "I don't know," Zora answered honestly. "It's like I've stepped into someone else's life. Nothing makes sense anymore." Dorothea nodded sympathetically. Family secrets have a way of doing that, turning everything upside down when they finally come to light. But you're strong, Zora. I can see that. Whatever you learn in London, whatever you decide to do with that knowledge, you'll find your way through. As they boarded the new aircraft that would take them to London, Zora clutched her backpack containing the photo, the key, and her father's, James Williams's, copy of The Secret Garden. The book felt different now, weighted with new meaning. Had he known when he wrote those margin notes that they weren't for his biological daughter? Had that mattered to him? She thought of the words Harrington had whispered on the plane, the words that had made her cry. "I'm your father, Zora. James raised you, but you're my daughter. I've loved you from afar your whole life." Were those the words of a man trying to claim what was never his? Or the painful truth of a father who had missed his child's entire life? As the plane lifted off from Gander, carrying her toward London and whatever revelations awaited there, Zora had no answers, only questions that burned like embers in her mind, waiting for the oxygen of truth to either extinguish them or ignite them into flame. The flight from Gander to London passed in a blur of conflicting emotions and fragmented thoughts. Zora barely registered the meal service, the in-flight movie, or the gradual shift from day to night outside her window. Beside her, Dorothea respected her need for silence, occasionally offering a gentle pat on the hand or a sympathetic smile, but otherwise allowing her the space to process the seismic revelations of the day. By the time they began their descent into Heathrow, darkness had fallen over London. As the plane banked over the city, Zora pressed her face to the window, taking in the sprawling expanse of lights below, a constellation of human activity spread across the landscape. Somewhere in that vast urban tapestry were the answers she sought, the truth about her mother, about Richard Harrington, about herself. "First time in London?" Dorothea asked, breaking the long silence between them. Zora nodded, still gazing at the city lights. "First time anywhere outside of Baltimore." "It's a special place," Dorothea said, "full of history and secrets, rather fitting considering your circumstances." The observation made Zora turn from the window. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she admitted. "The letter said a car would meet me at the airport to take me to a hotel. The law firm's representative is supposed to meet me there tomorrow morning. But now everything's changed," Dorothea finished for her. "But the practical matters remain the same. You still need transportation, accommodation, guidance. Perhaps it's best to stick with the original plan, at least until you have more information." The advice was sensible. Whatever emotional turmoil Zora was experiencing, she was still a 12-year-old in a foreign country with limited resources. The arrangements made for her, whether by Harrington or the mysterious law firm, represented her safest path forward. After landing, as they waited in the queue for immigration, Dorothea wrote her London phone number on a slip of paper. "I'll be staying with my son for the next month," she said, pressing the paper into Zora's hand. "If you need anything, advice, a friendly ear, a place to escape to, call me, day or night." Zora tucked the paper carefully into her wallet, unexpectedly moved by the kindness of this woman who had been a stranger just hours ago. "Thank you for everything." "You take care of yourself, Zora Williams." Dorothea embraced her briefly. "And remember, no matter what you discover about your past, it doesn't define your future. That part of the story belongs to you alone." With those parting words, they separated at immigration, Zora to the non-EU citizens' line, Dorothea to join her son who waited beyond the barriers. Alone again, Zora felt the full weight of her situation descend upon her. She was thousands of miles from home, carrying secrets and questions that seemed too heavy for her 12-year-old shoulders. Yet there was no turning back now. Whatever awaited her in London, she would face it. After clearing immigration and collecting her small suitcase, Zora entered the arrivals hall, scanning the crowd for someone who might be looking for her. Among the drivers holding signs with passengers' names, she spotted one that read simply, Z. Williams, Blackwell, Henderson and Associates. The driver was a middle-aged South Asian man with a neat mustache and kind eyes. "Miss Williams?" he inquired as she approached. "I'm Raj. I'll be taking you to your hotel." "Thank you," Zora said, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was after the tumultuous journey. As Raj led her to a sleek black car parked in the short-term lot, Zora wondered if he knew anything about her situation. Had he been hired by the law firm or by Harrington directly? Did he know why she was here, what secrets awaited her? His professional demeanor offered no clues. The drive into central London provided a welcome distraction. Despite her fatigue and emotional turmoil, Zora couldn't help but press her face to the window, taking in the sights of the ancient city illuminated against the night sky. The iconic Tower Bridge, the imposing silhouette of Parliament, the slowly rotating London Eye, landmarks she had only seen in books and movies now materialized before her eyes. "First visit to London?" Raj asked, noticing her fascination in the rearview mirror. "Yes," Zora replied, not volunteering more information. "You've picked a good time. June is lovely here, not too crowded with tourists yet, and the gardens are in full bloom." The casual conversation was comforting in its normality, a brief respite from the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her here. Zora found herself responding to Raj's gentle questions about her flight, eventful. She admitted without elaborating, and her plans in London uncertain, which wasn't a lie. The car eventually pulled up to a stately building in Mayfair, its facade illuminated by subtle lighting that highlighted its Georgian architecture. "The Claridge," Raj announced, "one of London's finest hotels." Zora stared at the ornate entrance, where uniformed doormen assisted guests from expensive vehicles. "There must be some mistake," she said. "I can't be staying here." Raj smiled kindly. "No mistake, Miss Williams. Your accommodation has been arranged by Mr. Henderson personally. Everything is taken care of." Mr. Henderson, one of the named partners at the law firm, presumably. Or was this another of Harrington's arrangements, made through his lawyers? Either way, it was clear that whoever had summoned her to London wanted her to be comfortable. With Raj's assistance, Zora was checked into the hotel by a receptionist who showed no surprise at a 12-year-old guest arriving alone late at night. "Mr. Henderson left this for you," the woman said, handing over a sealed envelope along with a key card. "And he asked me to inform you that Ms. Powell will meet you in the lobby at 9:30 tomorrow morning." The envelope contained a brief note on heavy cardstock, embossed with the law firm's letterhead. "Miss Williams, *. Welcome to London. I trust your journey was uneventful. Ms. Powell, one of our junior associates, will escort you to our offices tomorrow morning for our scheduled appointment. In the meantime, please avail yourself of the hotel's amenities. Room service is available 24 hours and has been instructed to accommodate any reasonable requests. With regards, Edward Henderson, senior partner. Blackwell, Henderson and Associates." There was no mention of Richard Harrington, no acknowledgement of the dramatic events that had unfolded during her uneventful journey. Either Henderson was unaware of what had happened, or he was maintaining a professional distance from the personal aspects of the situation. A bellhop escorted Zora to her room on the 4th floor. Not a standard room, she realized as the door opened, but a suite larger than the entire first floor of her home in Baltimore. A sitting area with elegant furnishings opened onto a bedroom with a 4-poster bed draped in luxurious linens. Fresh flowers stood on a side table next to a basket of fruit and chocolates. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of a quiet Mayfair street. "Will there be anything else, Miss Williams?" the bellhop asked after depositing her suitcase in the bedroom. "No, thank you," Zora replied, still overwhelmed by the opulence of her surroundings. Once alone, she sank onto a velvet sofa, the events of the past 24 hours crashing over her like a wave. The mysterious letter, the flight, Harrington and the photo, the medical emergency and turbulence, the diversion to Gander, the revelation about her parentage, the key burning a hole in her pocket. It was too much to process, especially in this strange, luxurious environment so removed from her normal life. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten properly since the brief meal on the plane hours ago. The note had mentioned room service. Despite her discomfort with the extravagance, her practical nature asserted itself. She was hungry, and food had been offered. After ordering a simple meal of soup and a sandwich, the least expensive items she could find on the extensive menu, Zora took a shower in the marble bathroom with its rainfall showerhead and array of expensive toiletries. The hot water washed away the physical grime of travel, but could do nothing for the emotional turbulence within her. Wrapped in a plush hotel robe, she sat on the edge of the bed and called the one person who might provide some anchor to reality in this surreal situation. "Hello," Grandmommy's voice, slightly weakened by her treatments but still carrying that core of strength that had been Zora's foundation, came through the phone. "Grandma, it's me," Zora said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Zora, thank the Lord, I've been worried sick. The airline called saying your flight was diverted because of weather and a medical emergency. Are you in London now? Are you safe?" "I'm fine," Zora assured her. "I'm at the hotel, it's really fancy." "HMPH," Grandmommy snorted. "Trying to impress us, I suppose, don't let it go to your head." The familiar skepticism made Zora smile despite everything. "I won't." "So what happened on that flight? They wouldn't tell me much, just that there was turbulence and someone got sick." Zora hesitated. Should she confront her grandmother now over the phone about what Harrington had revealed? Ask about July 17, 1992? Demand to know if James Williams was really her father? "Zora, you still there?" "Yes," she said, making a split-second decision. "It was scary for a while, bad turbulence. A man in first class had some kind of heart problem. They had to land in Canada to get him to a hospital." "Lord have mercy, was he all right?" "I think so, they stabilized him." Zora took a deep breath. "Grandma, do you remember a man named Richard Harrington?" The silence that followed was so profound that Zora thought the connection might have been lost. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, her grandmother said, "Where did you hear that name?" The response, not a denial, not confusion, but a question that confirmed recognition, sent Zora's heart racing. "He was on my flight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's the one who got sick." Another long silence. When Grandmommy spoke again, her voice had changed, hardened somehow. "What did he say to you?" The direct question deserved a direct answer. "He said he's my biological father." A sharp intake of breath, then a low, "Oh, Jesus." "Is it true?" Zora demanded, anger suddenly flaring. "Is Richard Harrington my real father? Was everything you and Mom told me about Dad, about James, a lie?" "Not a lie," Grandmommy said firmly. "Never a lie. James Williams was your father in every way that matters. He loved you from the moment he knew you existed. He raised you as his own for 4 years until that drunk driver took him from us. He is your father, Zora." "But biologically—" "Biology isn't everything," her grandmother cut in. "Family is more than blood. It's love, commitment, choice. James chose you. Remember that no matter what else you learn." Zora absorbed this, trying to reconcile the truth she'd always known with the new reality emerging. "Why didn't anyone ever tell me? I had a right to know." "You're 12 years old, child. There are many things you have yet to learn about the world, about adults and the complicated messes they make of their lives." Grandmommy sighed heavily. "Your mother and I decided, and James agreed, that it would be simpler, safer for you to grow up without that burden." "Safer from what?" "From prejudice, from pain, from being caught between worlds that don't always mix well." Another deep sigh. "It wasn't just about protecting you, though that was part of it. It was about protecting your mother, too, and the life she was trying to build." Zora thought of the Harrington she had observed on the plane, wealthy, entitled, cold. Then of the vulnerable man on the stretcher, desperate to speak to her. Both versions seemed real, yet irreconcilable. What happened between them, between Mom and Harrington? "That's not my story to tell, child. Not all of it. Some parts belong to your mother alone." "But she's gone," Zora said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "She left us. How am I supposed to get answers from someone who abandoned me?" The words hung in the air, raw and painful. Grandmommy didn't immediately respond, and when she did, her voice was gentle but firm. "Your mother didn't abandon you, Zora. She left you with me because she couldn't take care of you anymore. She was sick, not in her body but in her mind. The kind of sick that makes a person not trust their own thoughts, that makes them see danger where there isn't any. She left to protect you from what she was becoming. This was more than Grandma Me had ever shared about her mother's disappearance. Always before, when Zora had asked, the answers had been vague. She had troubles. Or she needed to find herself, or sometimes adults make choices that children can't understand. What kind of sick? Zora pressed, hungry for any information about the mother who had vanished from her life. Depression at first, then paranoia, delusions. She started to believe people were watching her, following her, plotting against her and you. Some days were better than others. She'd seem fine for weeks, then spiral down again. The doctors called it many things over the years: postpartum psychosis that never fully resolved, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder with psychotic features. The labels changed, but the suffering was constant. Zora thought of her bright, beautiful mother as she remembered her, reading stories in funny voices, dancing in the kitchen to Motown classics, helping with homework at the kitchen table. The image didn't align with what her grandmother was describing. "I don't remember her being sick," she said uncertainly. "She worked hard to hide it from you, and the worst of it came later after James died. His death broke something in her that never fully healed." A knock at the door interrupted the conversation. "Room service," called a voice from the hallway. "Grandma, I have to go. Food's here." "Zora, listen to me," Grandma Me said urgently. "Whatever Harrington tells you, whatever you learn in London, remember this: your mother loved you fiercely. So did James. So do I. Nothing can change that. Nothing." "I know," Zora said, though in truth, she felt uncertain about everything now. "Call me tomorrow after your meeting. And be careful, child. Powerful men like Harrington, they live by different rules than the rest of us." After saying goodbye, Zora let in the room service attendant, who set up her meal on a small table by the window. She ate mechanically, barely tasting the food, her mind too full of new revelations and lingering questions. When she'd finished eating, she took the key Harrington had given her from her pocket and studied it in the lamplight. Small, brass, unremarkable, yet it supposedly opened a box containing a letter from her mother, written before she disappeared. A letter that might explain everything, according to Harrington. But could she trust him? This man who claimed to be her biological father, who had apparently monitored her life from a distance for years, who had orchestrated this mysterious journey to London. Was he truly trying to give her answers, or was there some other agenda at work? As Zora crawled into the enormous bed, setting the alarm on the bedside clock for 8:00 a.m., she felt suspended between her past and future. Tomorrow she would meet with the lawyers, possibly open the safe deposit box, and begin to unravel the truth. But tonight, in this luxurious room so far from home, she was still just a 12-year-old girl trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly grown infinitely more complex. She fell asleep clutching her father's, James's, copy of The Secret Garden, the photo of her parents tucked safely between its pages, the key to her mother's letter beneath her pillow. In her dreams, she was flying through turbulent skies, searching for solid ground that kept shifting beneath her feet. The insistent beeping of the alarm pulled Zora from a deep, dreamless sleep. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The plush bedding, the elegant furnishings, the soft, natural light filtering through heavy curtains were all so different from her modest bedroom in Baltimore. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. The flight, Harrington's collapse, his revelation, the diverted landing, the phone call with her grandmother. She was in London, about to meet with lawyers who might have answers about her past, her parentage, her identity. Zora showered and dressed carefully in the clothes she'd packed for this meeting. A simple navy blue dress that had been a splurge at Target, purchased specifically for this trip, and her only pair of dress shoes, slightly scuffed at the toes but polished to a respectable shine. She pulled her hair back into neat braids, secured with blue elastics that matched her dress. Looking in the mirror, she was struck by how young she appeared, how vulnerable. Would these sophisticated London lawyers take her seriously? Would they tell her the truth, or would they see only a child to be managed? After a quick breakfast from room service, toast and fruit, the simplest options on the menu, Zora gathered her few important possessions: the photo, the key, her father's book, and the letter that had started this journey. She tucked them into her backpack alongside her passport and wallet. At precisely 9:25, she took the elevator down to the lobby, determined to be punctual for the meeting. The hotel was coming to life around her. Business travelers checking out, tourists planning their day's adventures, staff moving efficiently through their morning routines. Zora found a seat in a quiet corner of the lobby, her backpack clutched protectively on her lap, and waited. At 9:30 on the dot, a young woman in a tailored gray suit entered the lobby, her gaze sweeping the space with purpose. She was perhaps in her late 20s, with copper-red hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail and a tablet computer tucked under one arm. After a moment, her eyes landed on Zora, and she approached with a professional smile. "Miss Williams, I'm Lydia Powell from Blackwell, Henderson and Associates." She extended her hand. Zora stood and shook it, conscious of how small her hand felt in the woman's firm grip. "Nice to meet you." "I hope you found the accommodations satisfactory," Ms. Powell said, her crisp British accent making the routine question sound somehow more formal. "Yes, thank you, it's very nice." "Excellent, our offices are just a short walk from here if you don't mind. It's a lovely morning for it." As they exited the hotel into the June sunshine, Zora found herself studying Ms. Powell, searching for clues about what the woman might know. Was she aware of the circumstances surrounding this meeting? Did she know about Harrington, about the revelations on the plane? "I understand there was some excitement on your flight yesterday," Ms. Powell said as they waited to cross a busy street, answering Zora's unspoken question. "Mr. Harrington called from the hospital in Gander to inform us." "You know Mr. Harrington?" Zora asked cautiously. "He's one of the firm's oldest and most valued clients," Ms. Powell replied. "We handle many of his personal and business affairs." "Including me?" The question came out more bluntly than Zora had intended. Ms. Powell's professional demeanor slipped slightly, revealing a flash of genuine empathy. "This is an unusual situation for everyone involved, Miss Williams. I won't pretend otherwise. But my role today is simply to facilitate your meeting with Mr. Henderson, who will explain everything in detail." They turned onto a tree-lined street of imposing buildings, each with a polished brass plaque beside its entrance identifying law firms, investment companies, and private banks. Ms. Powell stopped before one of these buildings, its facade of Portland stone gleaming in the morning light. "Here we are," she announced. "Blackwell, Henderson and Associates has occupied this building since 1975. The interior was exactly what Zora would have expected of a prestigious London law firm. Wood-paneled walls, thick carpets that muffled their footsteps, oil paintings of stern-looking men in judicial robes. A receptionist greeted Ms. Powell by name and directed them to a lift that carried them silently to the third floor. They emerged into a corridor lined with doors, each bearing a nameplate. Ms. Powell led Zora to the end of the hall, where double doors opened into a spacious conference room. A large oval table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of a small, immaculately maintained garden courtyard below. "Please make yourself comfortable," Ms. Powell gestured to the chairs. "Mr. Henderson will join us shortly. Would you like some water or perhaps tea while you wait?" "Water, please," Zora said, suddenly aware of how dry her mouth had become. Left alone after Ms. Powell departed to fetch the water, Zora approached the windows, gazing down at the garden with its geometrically precise flower beds and central fountain. The scene was peaceful, at odds with the tumult of her thoughts. "It was designed in 1788, a deep voice said from the doorway. "The garden, that is, one of the few in Mayfair to survive both the Blitz and the development boom of the 1960s. Zora turned to find a tall, distinguished man in his 60s observing her. His silver hair was impeccably styled, his navy suit clearly expensive but understated. He carried a leather portfolio and had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Miss Williams," he said, crossing the room to offer his hand. "I'm Edward Henderson. Thank you for making this journey under such unusual circumstances." His grip was firm but not overwhelming, his manner courteous but not condescending. Zora found herself automatically standing a little straighter, responding to his dignified presence. "Please sit down," Henderson gestured to the table. "Ms. Powell will join us momentarily with refreshments, and then we can begin." As if on cue, Ms. Powell returned with a tray bearing a crystal pitcher of water, glasses, and a tea service. She set these on the table and took a seat slightly apart from them, opening her tablet as if preparing to take notes. Henderson settled across from Zora, placing his portfolio on the table before him. Before we proceed, Miss Williams, I must address the events that occurred during your flight yesterday. Mr. Harrington contacted me from the hospital in Gander to inform me of what transpired between you. I understand he shared certain information with you, information that ideally would have been disclosed in a more controlled environment, with proper preparation and support. His tone carried no judgment, just a factual assessment of the situation. Zora appreciated the directness. He told me he's my biological father, she said, matching his straightforwardness. Is that true? Henderson opened his portfolio and removed several documents. Yes, it is true. I have here the results of DNA testing conducted with your mother's consent shortly after your birth. The testing confirms with 99.997% certainty that Richard Harrington is your biological father. He slid one of the documents across the table, a clinical report filled with scientific terminology and statistical analyses that Zora couldn't fully comprehend, but whose conclusion was unambiguous. My mother knew she had this test done, Zora asked, struggling to reconcile this with what her grandmother had told her. Yes, Eliza was pragmatic about certain matters. She wanted scientific confirmation, both for her own peace of mind and as a matter of record, should it ever become necessary to establish paternity. But she married James Williams. She let everyone, including me, believe he was my father. Henderson nodded, his expression somber. That was her choice, made with James's full knowledge and cooperation. A choice that Richard, after initial objections, came to accept as being in your best interest at that time. At that time, Zora repeated, catching the qualification. But not anymore, is that why I'm here? You're here because circumstances have changed, Henderson confirmed. Your grandmother's illness, your mother's continued absence, and Richard's own. Evolution and thinking have created a situation where all parties involved believe you deserve to know the truth and to have certain options available to you. What kind of options? Henderson removed another document from his portfolio. Richard has established a trust in your name. This trust provides for your education through the university level, housing expenses, health care, and a substantial sum to be made available to you upon reaching the age of 25. The trust is irrevocable and will be administered by this firm regardless of any personal relationship you may or may not choose to have with Richard going forward. Zora stared at the document, a legal instrument bristling with clauses and conditions, its language dense and formal. The figures mentioned made her breath catch. Even to her inexperienced eye, it was clear that the trust represented wealth beyond anything she had ever imagined possessing. Why now? She asked, pushing the document back toward Henderson. Why not years ago or years from now? Why when Grandma Me is sick? Henderson's expression softened slightly. Your grandmother's prognosis, while not immediately dire, has raised questions about guardianship should her condition worsen. Without your mother's presence, and with no other close relatives identified, there was concern about what would happen to you in such circumstances. The implication struck Zora with chilling clarity. Foster care, she said quietly. A possibility that Richard was unwilling to accept, Henderson confirmed. Hence the acceleration of this disclosure, which might otherwise have waited until you were older. Zora's mind raced with the implications. Was Harrington planning to claim her if Grandma Me couldn't care for her anymore? Take her away from Baltimore, from everything familiar, to live with a stranger who happened to share her DNA. I want to see my mother's letter, she said suddenly, remembering the key still in her pocket. Harrington said there's a safety deposit box with a letter from her. Henderson exchanged a glance with Ms. Powell before nodding. Yes, there is such a letter. Eliza deposited it with us before her departure, with instructions that it be provided to you if and when the truth of your parentage was disclosed. But Harrington gave me a key, Zora insisted, removing it from her pocket. He said it opens a box at Barclays Bank. Ah, Henderson's expression cleared. That would be the key to Richard's personal box, which contains items he has collected for you over the years. Mementos, photographs, records of your achievements that came to his attention. Your mother's letter, however, is here in our possession. We can provide it to you now if you wish. The revelation that Harrington had been maintaining a collection of items related to her life, a shrine of sorts to the daughter he had never publicly claimed, sent an uneasy shiver through Zora. It felt intrusive, even if well-intentioned. "Yes," she said firmly, "I want to read it now." Henderson nodded to Ms. Powell, who rose and left the room. While they waited for her return, Henderson continued outlining the legal aspects of the situation. "Regardless of what you decide after reading your mother's letter and considering all aspects of this situation, the trust will remain in place. You are under no obligation to establish or maintain a relationship with Richard, nor are there any conditions attached to the financial provisions he has made for you." "What does he want from me?" Zora asked bluntly. Henderson considered the question carefully before answering. "Speaking not as his lawyer, but as someone who has known Richard for over 30 years, I believe what he wants is simply the opportunity to know you, to be part of your life in whatever capacity you might allow. He has watched from a distance as you've grown, adhering to the boundaries established when you were born. Now, he hopes those boundaries might be redrawn." Before Zora could respond, Ms. Powell returned carrying a sealed envelope. She placed it on the table before Zora and resumed her seat. "This was left in our care by Eliza Williams in September of 2000, shortly before her departure," Henderson explained. "It has remained sealed since that time, awaiting this moment." The envelope was thick, made of heavy cream-colored paper. With Zora's name written on the front in handwriting she recognized immediately. The same script that had signed countless permission slips, written notes in lunch boxes, penned birthday cards that Zora still kept in a special box under her bed. Her mother's handwriting. With trembling fingers, Zora picked up the envelope. It felt substantial, suggesting multiple pages inside. She looked at Henderson. "May I have some privacy?" "Of course," he said, rising immediately. "Ms. Powell and I will wait outside. Take as much time as you need." Once alone in the conference room, Zora stared at the envelope for several long moments. Here finally might be answers to the questions that had haunted her for years. Why had her mother left? Where had she gone? And now, added to those long-standing questions, new ones burned. What had happened between her mother and Harrington? Why had she chosen to let James Williams claim Zora as his own? Taking a deep breath, Zora carefully opened the envelope, trying not to tear the paper that her mother had touched, had written upon, had sealed with whatever truths she felt compelled to preserve for her daughter. Inside were several pages of heavy stationery, covered front and back with the familiar handwriting, sometimes neat and measured, other places hurried and emotional, as if the words had poured out faster than they could be captured. Zora began to read. "My dearest Zora asterisk, if you are reading this letter, then you have learned the truth about your father, about Richard Harrington and James Williams, and the choice I made before you were born. I don't know how old you are now, or what circumstances have led to this revelation. I hope you are old enough to understand, to forgive, to see beyond the simple labels of right and wrong to the complex reality where most of life actually happens. I need to start by telling you about James, the man who chose to be your father in every way that matters. James and I met at Howard University in 1989. We were both undergraduate students, he in engineering, I in computer science. We became friends first, study partners who shared ambitions and backgrounds. Both of us were first-generation college students from working-class families, determined to create better futures through education. After graduation, we both found jobs at Tech Corp, one of the emerging technology companies of that era. James was in product development. I worked in programming. We remained friends, though not romantic, more like siblings supporting each other in a predominantly white male industry where we both felt like outsiders. It was at Tech Corp that I met Richard Harrington. He was already successful, already wealthy, the founder and CEO of a rival company that was considering acquiring Tech Corp. He was 20 years my senior, married with grown children, established in ways I could only aspire to be. The relationship began professionally. Richard noticed my work, my ideas. He started finding reasons to include me in meetings, to seek my input on technical matters. The attention was flattering. Here was this powerful man, this industry pioneer, treating me like my thoughts mattered, like I mattered. I won't pretend I didn't know he was married. I knew. I also won't pretend I was coerced or manipulated. I was young but not naive, ambitious but not calculating. What happened between us was mutual, gradual, and ultimately consuming, for me at least. For 6 months, we carried on a secret relationship. Hotel rooms in cities where we both happened to be for business. Late-night phone calls, encrypted emails. It was exciting, intoxicating. I believed, or made myself believe, that his marriage was over in all but name, that eventually we would be together openly. Then I discovered I was pregnant with you. When I told Richard, his reaction was complex. There was fear of scandal, of damage to his reputation, his marriage, his company. There was also a strange sort of wonder. He held my hand as we looked at the first ultrasound images and whispered, "That's our child." For a brief, shining moment, I thought everything would work out. Richard talked about leaving his wife, about us becoming a family, but reality intruded quickly and brutally. His wife discovered our relationship. His board of directors got wind of the potential scandal. The possible merger with TechCorp collapsed. My position there became untenable as rumors spread. On July 17, 1992, I don't know if that date means anything to you, but it changed everything for me. Richard came to my apartment ashen-faced. His wife had threatened to take everything in a divorce if he left her for his pregnant black mistress. Her words, not mine. His board had presented him with a stark choice: end the relationship or face removal as CEO of the company he had founded. He chose his company, his position, his existing family. He offered financial support for you, suggested a discreet arrangement where he would provide for us from a distance. What he couldn't offer was himself, his name, his presence in our lives. I was devastated, heartbroken, and suddenly very alone. 4 months pregnant, unemployed. I had resigned from TechCorp amid the rumors, and abandoned by the man I had believed would stand by me. It was James who found me in this state. James, who had remained my friend despite disapproving of my relationship with Richard. James, who brought groceries when I couldn't leave the apartment, who attended doctor's appointments when I had no one else, who held me through nights of tears and rage. It was James who, when I was 7 months pregnant and showing no signs of recovery from my emotional collapse, made an extraordinary offer. He would marry me, give the baby his name, raise the child as his own. No strings attached. Not even a real marriage if that wasn't what I wanted. Just his name, his protection, his support for a friend in need and an innocent child who deserved a father willing to be present. I accepted his offer, not out of romantic love, but out of desperate gratitude and practical necessity. We were married in a small civil ceremony 2 weeks later. Richard, when informed, provided a settlement that he called a wedding gift, but that we all understood was effectively child support disguised as something else. And then on March 15, 1993, you were born. My beautiful, perfect daughter. The moment the nurse placed you in my arms, I knew I would do anything to protect you, including maintaining the fiction that James was your biological father. For 4 years, we lived as a family. It wasn't a conventional marriage. James and I shared a home, shared parenting duties, shared a deep friendship, but never shared a bed. He dated occasionally. I remained emotionally unavailable, still healing from Richard's abandonment. Yet in all the ways that truly mattered, we were a family. James adored you. He was there for your first steps, your first words, your first day of preschool. He read to you every night, taught you to ride a tricycle, held you when you had nightmares. He was your father, Zora, in every way that counts. When James died in that car accident, part of me died too. Not because I had fallen in love with him romantically. Our relationship had never evolved in that direction. But because he was my best friend, my co-parent, my rock. And because I knew with terrible clarity that his death meant I could no longer maintain the protective bubble we had created around you. Richard reached out after the funeral. He expressed genuine grief over James's death. They had developed a strange, distant respect for each other over the years. He also, tentatively, raised the possibility of playing a more active role in your life now that James was gone. I refused. Perhaps out of lingering anger, perhaps out of fear of disrupting your life further after losing the only father you had known. Richard accepted my decision, but set up a trust fund for you and made it clear that the door remained open should I ever change my mind. The years after James's death were difficult. I struggled with depression that gradually evolved into something more frightening. I began experiencing paranoia, hearing voices, developing elaborate delusions. Some days were better than others. On good days, I could almost pretend everything was normal. On bad days, I was convinced that Richard was having us followed, that government agents were monitoring our communications, that unknown enemies were plotting to take you away from me. I sought treatment, therapy, medication, even brief hospitalizations when things were at their worst. Your grandmother Me was my lifeline during this time, caring for you when I couldn't, maintaining a stable environment amid the chaos of my deteriorating mental health. By the time you were 7, it had become clear to me that my presence in your life was doing more harm than good. My condition was worsening despite all treatment efforts. I was becoming unpredictable, sometimes frightening to you. I couldn't bear the look in your eyes when I was in the grip of delusions, confusion, fear, the terrible burden of a child trying to understand a parent's madness. So I made the most painful decision of my life, to remove myself from the equation, to leave you with me, who could provide the stability and safety I no longer could, to disappear before I could do more damage to your developing sense of security and self. I didn't abandon you, Zora. I left because I loved you too much to stay and inflict my brokenness upon you day after day. Where am I now? I don't know what Me has told you or what you may have imagined. The truth is both simpler and more complex than most scenarios. After leaving Baltimore, I checked myself into a long-term psychiatric facility in Arizona. The dry climate, the distance from triggers associated with my past, the intensive treatment program all offered hope for stabilization, if not recovery. I have remained there voluntarily for these past years. My condition fluctuates, periods of lucidity interspersed with descents into psychosis. During the good periods, I write letters to Me, receive updates about you, treasure the photographs she sends. During the bad periods, I lose touch with reality entirely, sometimes for months at a time. I don't know if I will ever be well enough to re-enter your life. The doctors are not optimistic about full recovery, though they speak of management and adaptation as realistic goals. What I do know is that I love you with every fiber of my being, and that leaving you was the most loving act I could perform under the circumstances. As for Richard Harrington, your biological father, I cannot tell you what role he should play in your life going forward. That decision belongs to you alone. What I can tell you is this: despite his initial failure of courage, he has never stopped caring about you. The trust fund, the anonymous contributions to your school and community programs, the discreet monitoring of your welfare, these were not the actions of a man who had washed his hands of responsibility. If Richard has now chosen to reveal himself to you, to offer a relationship of some kind, I believe it comes from a genuine desire to know his daughter. Whether you accept that offer is entirely your choice, with no judgment from me either way. The past cannot be changed, Zora. James is gone. I am absent. Richard has been a shadow, but your future remains unwritten, full of possibilities that none of us could have imagined when we made our flawed, human choices all those years ago. Whatever you decide, know this with absolute certainty: you have been loved. By James, who chose you, by me, who carried you, by me, who has stood steadfast, and yes, even by Richard, who watched from a distance but never truly looked away. You are the best of all of us. James's kindness, Richard's intelligence, my determination. Forge your own path with that remarkable combination, and know that somewhere, even in my most disconnected moments, I am proud of the woman you are becoming. With eternal love, Mom. Zora lowered the letter, tears streaming down her face. The words had transported her through time, through her mother's experiences, through the complicated web of relationships that had preceded her birth and shaped her early years. It was a story of love and loss, of difficult choices and unintended consequences, of mental illness and sacrifice. For the first time, she understood her mother's disappearance not as abandonment, but as a desperate, heartbreaking act of protection. She saw James Williams not as a deceived husband, but as a man who had chosen fatherhood out of pure love and friendship. And she glimpsed Richard Harrington not simply as the cold, entitled businessman she had observed on the plane, but as a flawed, complex human who had made both selfish and selfless choices regarding the daughter he had never publicly claimed. The knowledge was overwhelming, too much to process all at once, Too many revelations to integrate into her understanding of herself, her past, her possible futures. A gentle knock on the door pulled her from these thoughts. Henderson's voice called softly, "Miss Williams, are you all right?" "Yes," she managed, quickly wiping her tears. "You can come in." Henderson entered alone, his expression compassionate but not pitying. He took a seat across from her, giving her space while remaining present. "It's a lot to absorb," he said simply. Zora nodded, carefully folding the letter and returning it to its envelope. "My mother is in a psychiatric facility in Arizona," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Did you know that?" "Yes," Henderson admitted. "Richard has ensured that she receives the best care available. He visits when her condition permits it." This new information, that Harrington had maintained some connection to her mother all these years, added yet another layer to the complex picture forming in Zora's mind. "I need to see her," Zora said decisively, "and I need to talk to Grandmommy again now that I've read this." Henderson nodded. "Both can be arranged. Richard has already spoken with your grandmother this morning from the hospital in Gander. She has given permission for you to visit your mother with appropriate preparation and support." "And what about Harrington? What does he expect from me now?" "Richard will be returning to London once he's medically cleared to travel, perhaps in a few days. He hopes you'll agree to meet with him then, but he's explicitly stated that all decisions going forward are yours to make. There is no pressure, no expectation beyond what you are comfortable with." Zora sat silently for a moment, trying to imagine what such a meeting might be like. What would she say to the man who was her biological father but a stranger? The man who had abandoned her mother, yet watched over Zora from a distance her entire life. "I think," she said slowly, "that I would like to see what's in that safe deposit box before I decide anything else." Henderson smiled slightly, the first real smile she had seen from him. "I thought you might say that. Ms. Powell has already arranged for us to visit Barclays after lunch if that suits you." The efficiency of these arrangements, the sense that her reactions had been anticipated, prepared for, might have felt manipulative under different circumstances. But now, understanding more of the history involved, Zora recognized it as a kind of care. These adults were trying, however imperfectly, to make an impossible situation manageable for a 12-year-old suddenly confronted with life-altering revelations. "Thank you," she said simply. "There is one other matter we should discuss," Henderson said, his tone becoming more formal again. "In the event that your grandmother's health deteriorates significantly, arrangements will need to be made regarding your guardianship. Richard has expressed his desire to be considered as an option, but he is also aware that such a transition would be extremely disruptive given that you have never known him in that capacity." "What other options would there be?" Zora asked, her heart clenching at the thought of Grandmommy becoming too ill to care for her. "There are several possibilities. Richard has suggested that, should it become necessary, you might live with his sister, Catherine Harrington Brooks, who resides in Washington, D.C. She is aware of your existence and has expressed willingness to become your guardian if needed. This would allow you to remain relatively close to Baltimore and maintain your existing school and social connections while still having a family connection to Richard. The fact that Harrington had a sister who knew about her, another relative she had never met, was yet another surprise. How many people had been aware of her existence while she remained ignorant of theirs? Or, Henderson continued, arrangements could be made for a trusted family friend to assume guardianship. Your mother mentioned someone in her letters to Richard, a Ms. Jenkins who taught at your elementary school. "Ms. Jenkins," Zora was startled by the name. "My fourth-grade teacher." "Yes, apparently she and your mother developed a friendship, and she has remained in contact with your grandmother. Your mother suggested her as someone you trust and who understands your circumstances." Zora remembered Ms. Jenkins with fondness, a warm, no-nonsense teacher who had pushed Zora academically while showing genuine interest in her as a person. She had indeed remained in their lives, occasionally visiting Grandmommy and always asking about Zora's progress at her new school. "These are not decisions that need to be made today," Henderson assured her. "They are simply options to consider as we move forward. For now, your grandmother's condition remains stable, and there is no immediate need for alternative arrangements." The weight of all these considerations, her mother's letter, Harrington's revelation, the complex web of adults who had shaped her life from the shadows, the uncertain future regarding her grandmother's health, suddenly felt crushing. Zora was, after all, only 12 years old, confronting questions and decisions that would challenge even the most mature adult. As if sensing her overwhelm, Henderson closed his portfolio. "I suggest we break for lunch," he said gently. "Give you some time to process what you've learned. Then, if you still wish to, we can visit the bank this afternoon." Zora nodded gratefully. "I'd like that." As Henderson escorted her from the conference room, Zora clutched her mother's letter close. Whatever came next, the contents of Harrington's safe deposit box, the eventual meeting with the man himself, the visit to her mother in Arizona, the conversations with Grandmommy, she now had something she had lacked when boarding that flight from Baltimore: context, understanding, a glimpse into the complicated, messy human circumstances that had shaped her existence. It wasn't a complete picture yet. There were still questions to be answered, relationships to be explored or rejected, decisions to be made. But for the first time since discovering that photograph on the plane, Zora felt something like solid ground beneath her feet. Not the comfortable certainty of the life she had known before, but something new and tentative. A foundation of truth, however complex and painful, upon which she could begin to build whatever came next. As she stepped out of the law office into the London sunshine, Zora Williams, daughter of Eliza, chosen daughter of James, biological daughter of Richard, took a deep breath of the foreign air and felt, despite everything, a flicker of hope for the future that awaited her. A future that, as her mother had written, remained unwritten and full of possibilities. Did that video keep you on the edge of your seat? Subscribe to our channel right now to see more extraordinary true stories like this one. Drop a comment below telling us your thoughts about this incredible connection between Zora and Richard. What do you think she'll find in that safe deposit box? The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floor of Barclays Bank as Henderson led Zora through the imposing entrance hall. The space exuded old-world wealth and discretion: dark wood paneling, brass fixtures, hushed conversations between staff and clients who all seemed to be conducting business of great importance. Ms. Powell had remained at the law office, leaving Zora alone with Henderson for this next step in her journey. After a quiet lunch at a nearby cafe, during which Henderson had respectfully given her space to process her mother's letter, they had walked the few blocks to the bank in companionable silence. Now Henderson approached the reception desk with the confidence of a regular visitor. "Edward Henderson and Zora Williams to access Richard Harrington's box, please." The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with impeccable posture, consulted her computer screen. "Ah, yes, Mr. Henderson. Mr. Harrington called ahead to authorize Miss Williams's access. Martin will escort you to the vault." A young bank employee appeared promptly, leading them through a security checkpoint where Henderson showed identification for both himself and Zora. They descended in a private elevator to a lower level of the bank, where the air was noticeably cooler and the sounds of the street above completely absent. "This way, please," Martin directed them down a corridor to a heavy door marked Private Client Vault. He used a keycard to grant them access, then escorted them into a room lined with safe deposit boxes of varying sizes. "Box 1742, Henderson informed him. Martin consulted a ledger, then led them to a medium-sized box near the back of the vault. "I'll need the client key," he said. Zora removed Harrington's key from her pocket and handed it over. Martin combined it with a bank key, turning both simultaneously in the lock. With a solid click, the mechanism released. "I'll leave you to your privacy," Martin said, placing the box on a table in a small adjacent room equipped with a chair and a simple lamp. "Press the call button when you're finished." He closed the door behind him as he exited. Zora stared at the metal box, her heart racing. What would she find inside? More revelations about her past. Items collected by a father who had watched her life unfold from a distance. "Would you prefer to examine the contents alone?" Henderson asked gently. Zora considered this. Part of her wanted complete privacy for this moment, but another part recognized the value of having someone steady and knowledgeable present, especially if the contents proved overwhelming. "You can stay," she decided, "but maybe just sit over there, let me look first." Henderson nodded. taking a seat in the corner of the small room, giving her as much space as the confined area would allow. With trembling fingers, Zora lifted the lid of the safe deposit box. Inside, she found several items carefully arranged. A small leather-bound journal, a velvet jewelry box, a USB drive, and a stack of photographs secured with a silk ribbon. She reached for the photographs first, untying the ribbon carefully. The top image showed a newborn baby, herself, presumably, sleeping in a hospital bassinet. The next showed the same infant being held by a much younger version of her mother. Exhaustion and joy mingled on Eliza's face. As Zora flipped through the stack, she saw herself growing, taking first steps, blowing out birthday candles, riding a tricycle, standing proudly in front of an elementary school with a backpack almost as big as she was. "He kept photos of me," she said softly, more to herself than to Henderson. "All these years." "James sent them at first," Henderson explained quietly from his corner. Despite the complexity of the situation, he understood the importance of maintaining that connection. After his death, your grandmother continued the practice, though less frequently and with more reluctance. Zora continued through the images, noting a distinct change around age 4, the period when James had died. The photos became less intimate, more formal. School portraits, dance recitals viewed from a distance, a spelling bee trophy presentation captured from the back of an auditorium. The visual evidence of Harrington's shift from welcomed observer to distant monitor was striking. Setting the photos aside, Zora next opened the jewelry box. Inside lay a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. She carefully opened the tiny clasp to reveal 2 miniature photographs. On one side, her mother as a young woman. On the other, Richard Harrington, looking much younger than the man she had met on the plane. "It was his grandmother's," Henderson said. "A family heirloom he had intended to give to your mother before their relationship ended. He replaced the original photos with these, planning to give it to you someday." Zora closed the locket gently and returned it to its box. The gesture felt simultaneously touching and presumptuous, a gift prepared for a relationship that had never existed. Next, she picked up the USB drive, turning it in her palm questioningly. "Academic and medical records primarily," Henderson explained. "Richard has monitored your educational progress and health status through various means over the years, some through your grandmother's sporadic cooperation, others through more indirect channels." The euphemism for what must have been some form of surveillance, however well-intentioned, made Zora uncomfortable. She set the drive aside without comment. Finally, she opened the leather journal. Unlike the other items, which represented Harrington's collection of information about her, this appeared to be something personal from him. The pages were filled with his handwriting, entries spanning years, each dated and addressed to "my daughter." Randomly, she read an entry from when she would have been 6 years old. October 15, 1999 asterisk. "My daughter asterisk. Today I watched from my car as you participated in your school's fall festival. You wore a yellow dress and had your hair in 2 braids tied with matching ribbons. When your class performed their song on stage, you sang with such confidence, such joy. The pride I felt was overwhelming, and then immediately followed by the familiar ache of knowing I cannot approach you, cannot tell you who I am, cannot receive even a smile of recognition. James has been gone for nearly 2 years now. Eliza's condition worsens, according to the reports I receive. I have raised the possibility of establishing contact with you through proper channels, but both Eliza and her mother remain adamantly opposed. Perhaps they are right. What could I offer you now, after so much time has passed? How could I explain my absence in your life in terms a 6-year-old could understand or forgive? So I remain in the shadows, watching my daughter shine in a world I cannot enter. It is a peculiar form of purgatory, to love so completely someone who does not know you exist." Zora flipped forward several years. March 15, 2003 asterisk. "My daughter asterisk. You are 10 years old today. A decade of life I have witnessed only in fragments and from a distance. The reports say you are thriving academically despite the challenges at home. Your grandmother does her best, but her health is not what it once was, and Eliza's absence has left a void no one else can truly fill. I find myself wondering what kind of father I would have been had circumstances been different. Would I have been patient with homework questions? Would I have learned to braid your hair properly? Would I have known how to comfort you after nightmares or disappointments? These questions haunt me, especially on milestone days like today. The path not taken stretches before me like a parallel life, one where courage and honesty prevailed over fear and convenience. I have increased the funding for your school's STEM program after learning of your aptitude in mathematics. It is a small thing, an indirect contribution to your development. Not what a father should provide, but what this father can offer from his self-imposed exile. Happy birthday, Zora. Though you do not know it, you are celebrated today not only by those around you but by someone watching from afar, whose heart swells with pride at the person you are becoming. Zara. The entries continued, chronicling Harrington's distant observation of her life, his internal struggles with his choices, his gradual evolution from regretful observer to someone determined to eventually establish contact. The most recent entry was dated just 2 weeks earlier. May 24, 2005 asterisk. My daughter asterisk. The arrangements are complete. The letter has been sent. Soon you will board a plane to London, and our paths will finally intersect after 12 years of parallel existence. Me's cancer has forced this timing, though I had hoped to wait until you were older, better equipped to understand the complicated circumstances of your birth and my absence. I am terrified you will hate me for my cowardice. Terrified you will reject any relationship I might offer. Terrified, most of all, that my presence in your life will cause you pain rather than bring any measure of healing or completion. Yet I am also hopeful. You are, by all accounts, a remarkable young woman, intelligent, resilient, compassionate despite the hardships you have faced. Perhaps, even if you cannot find it in your heart to forgive me, you might at least be willing to know me. To let me know you beyond the distance reports and stolen glimpses that have sustained me these many years. Whatever happens when we meet, know this. You have been loved. Imperfectly, incompletely, from an inexcusable distance, but loved nonetheless, with a father's heart that has never stopped beating in time with yours across all the miles and years between us. Zora closed the journal, tears welling in her eyes. The entries revealed a man wrestling with his choices, living with regret, yet unable or unwilling to breach the boundaries that had been established at her birth. A man who had loved her from afar in his way, while failing to provide what she had most needed: presence, connection, truth. He didn't plan to be on my flight, did he? She asked Henderson, her voice thick with emotion. No, Henderson confirmed. That was coincidence or fate, depending on your perspective. Richard was returning from a business meeting in New York. When he saw you boarding, he was overwhelmed. He had planned to meet you here in London in controlled circumstances with proper preparation. Instead, he found himself sharing an aircraft with a daughter he had never properly met. Zora tried to imagine what that moment had been like for him. The shock of recognition, the panic, the internal debate about whether to approach her. No wonder he had seemed so agitated, so determined to maintain his isolation in first class. He had been trying to preserve the careful plan that was now unraveling around him. And the photo, the one that fell from his pocket. He always carries it, Henderson said simply. Has done for years, a reminder he once told me of what his choices had cost him. Zora carefully returned the journal to the safe deposit box, along with the other items. Only the locket remained in her hand, its gold chain spilling between her fingers like liquid light. He wants you to have that, Henderson noted, regardless of what you decide about meeting with him. After a moment's hesitation, Zora slipped the necklace into her pocket. Not to wear, she wasn't ready for that, but to keep. A tangible connection to a history she was only beginning to understand. I think I'd like to go back to the hotel now, she said quietly. I need to call my grandmother. Henderson nodded, pressing the call button to summon Martin. As they completed the necessary procedures to secure the box and exit the vault, Zora's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Anger at the deceptions that had shaped her life. Grief for the father she had lost and the mother who had left to protect her. Confusion about her place in this newly revealed family constellation. And most surprisingly, a flicker of compassion for Richard Harrington, the father who had watched from a distance, trapped in a prison partly of his own making. Back at the Claridge, Henderson left her with arrangements to meet again the following morning. Take the evening to process everything, he advised. Call your grandmother, rest, There's no rush to make any decisions. Alone in her suite, Zora kicked off her shoes and curled up on the plush sofa, phone in hand. It was early afternoon in Baltimore. Grandma Mee would be home from her treatment by now, resting in her favorite recliner, perhaps watching her soap operas with the volume slightly too loud. The phone rang 3 times before her grandmother's voice answered, sounding tired but alert. "Zora, is that you, child?" "It's me, Grandma." Hearing the familiar voice release something in Zora, and tears began flowing freely. "I know everything now about Mom, about James, about Harrington." A heavy sigh came through the line. "I figured as much. That man, Harrington, he called me from his hospital bed, if you can believe it. Told me what happened on the plane, what he told you. Asked my permission to show you your mother's letter." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" The question emerged more sad than accusatory. "All these years, you let me believe." "I let you believe you had a father who loved you," Grandma Mee interrupted firmly. "And that was no lie. James Williams loved you from the moment he knew you existed. Biology don't make a father, Zora. Love does. Presence does. James was your father in every way that matters." "But Harrington—" "Richard Harrington is the man whose DNA you carry. That's a fact, not a relationship." Grandma Mee's voice softened slightly. "But if you're asking if he has a right to know you now after all this time, that's not for me to say. That's your decision based on what you need and want, not what any of us adults think is best." The space her grandmother was giving her, to make her own choice without pressure or guilt, was a gift Zora hadn't expected. For so long, the adults in her life had made decisions for her, allegedly for her protection, but without her knowledge or consent. Now, finally, she was being offered agency in this fundamental aspect of her identity. "Mom's letter said she's in a facility in Arizona," Zora said. "Did you know that?" "Yes," Grandma Mee admitted. "I've known since she first checked herself in. I receive updates from her doctors monthly. Sometimes, when she's lucid, we speak on the phone." "Why didn't you tell me she was sick? You let me think she just left, like I wasn't important enough to stay for." "Oh, child," Grandma Mee's voice cracked with emotion. "That was never what we wanted you to think. We, your mother and I, we thought you were too young to understand mental illness of that severity. We thought it would be easier for you to adapt to her absence without the burden of worrying about her condition, which even the doctors couldn't predict or control." "I deserve to know," Zora insisted, tears flowing freely now. "Even if I couldn't understand everything, I deserved some version of the truth." "You're right," her grandmother conceded, surprising Zora with the admission. "Looking back, I see that now. We were so focused on protecting you that we didn't consider the harm our silence might cause. I'm sorry, Zora, truly sorry." The straightforward apology, offered without defensiveness or qualification, helped soothe some of the hurt Zora felt. Not all of it, that would take time, but enough that she could continue the conversation without the anger that had been building inside her. "Henderson says I can visit Mom in Arizona. That Harrington has arranged it, if you agree." "If that's what you want, I won't stand in your way," Grandma Mee said. "But you should know, your mother isn't always present. She has good days and bad days. The doctors would need to evaluate whether a visit would be beneficial or harmful to her condition at any given time." "I understand," Zora said, though in truth, she couldn't fully comprehend what it would be like to meet a mother who might not recognize her, might not be able to engage with her in any meaningful way. "I still want to try." "Then we'll make it happen," Grandma Mee promised. "After you return from London, we'll go together." The inclusion, "we'll go," was comforting. Whatever else had changed, whatever new relationships might form in the wake of these revelations, her grandmother remained her rock, her constant. "What about Harrington?" Zora asked, coming to the question that had been hovering at the edges of their conversation. "He wants to meet with me when he gets back to London. Should I agree?" Grandma Mee was silent for a long moment before responding. "What do you want to do, Zora? Not what you think you should do or what might make others happy. What does your heart tell you?" Zora considered the question seriously. What did she want? The anger she felt toward Harrington for his absence, his distance, his failure to acknowledge her publicly was real. But so was her curiosity about this man who shared her DNA, who had watched over her from afar, who had filled a safe deposit box with mementos of a relationship that existed only in his imagination and in the biological connection they shared. I think I want to meet him," she said slowly. "Not to forgive him necessarily or to start some kind of father-daughter relationship right away, but to understand. To see him as a real person, not just this wealthy stranger who suddenly appeared in my life claiming to be my father." "Then that's what you should do," Grandmommy said simply. "Meet him, ask your questions, decide for yourself what kind of relationship, if any, you want going forward." "What if?" Zora hesitated, then forced herself to ask the question that had been lurking in her mind since Henderson mentioned guardianship arrangements. "What if your cancer gets worse? Would I have to live with him?" "Oh, baby," Grandmommy's voice softened with compassion. "First of all, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. These treatments are hard, but they're working. Dr. Patel says my prognosis is good for remission." "But if the worst happened," her grandmother continued firmly, "there are plans in place. Did they mention Catherine to you, Richard's sister?" "Yes, and Miss Jenkins, too." "Those are the options we've discussed, me, the lawyers, and yes, Harrington, too. But nothing's been decided permanently and nothing will be without your input. You're 12 now, not 2. Your wishes matter in this." The reassurance eased some of the anxiety that had been building in Zora's chest. She wasn't going to be handed off like a package to a stranger, even one who shared her blood. She would have a voice in what happened next. "I miss you, Grandma," she said, the words coming from a place of sudden, intense longing for the familiar. Her grandmother's coconut-scented lotion, the creak of the porch swing where they often sat in the evenings, the sound of gospel music playing softly on Sunday mornings. "I miss you too, child, but you're doing fine. Better than fine, you're handling all this with more grace and maturity than most adults would manage. I'm proud of you, Zora, so proud." The simple words of affirmation brought fresh tears to Zora's eyes. In the midst of all this upheaval, her grandmother's steady love remained a constant, a true north by which she could navigate even the stormiest waters. They spoke for a while longer, about practical matters regarding Zora's extended stay in London, about Grandmommy's treatments, and how the neighbors were helping out, about small, normal things that had nothing to do with biological fathers or mental illness or legal arrangements. By the time they said goodbye, with promises to speak again the next day, Zora felt more centered, more grounded in herself despite the shifting landscape of her family history. As evening fell over London, Zora ordered a simple dinner from room service and ate by the window, watching the city transition from day to night. Lights came on in buildings across the street, illuminating the lives of strangers, families gathering for dinner, business people working late, couples settling in for the evening. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, each with their own complicated histories, their own secrets, their own triumphs and regrets. In one of those lighted windows, a man about Harrington's age played chess with a girl who might have been his granddaughter. They laughed as he made a move, the girl shaking her head in mock disappointment before countering with her own strategic play. The simple scene, a moment of intergenerational connection and joy, sent an unexpected pang through Zora's heart. What would it have been like to grow up knowing Richard Harrington as her father? To have played chess with him, to have learned from him, to have developed the natural, unforced relationship that comes from years of shared experiences. It was a reality she would never know, a path permanently closed by the choices made before her birth and in the years that followed. Yet a new path was opening, uncertain, complicated, potentially painful, but also possibly healing. A path where she could know this man not as the father she had lost, but as the biological father she was just beginning to discover. A path where she could integrate the truths she had learned into a more complete understanding of herself and her origins. As she prepared for bed in the luxurious hotel suite, so far from the modest bedroom she shared with occasional cockroaches and a temperamental radiator back home, Zora made a decision. She would meet with Richard Harrington when he returned to London. She would listen to what he had to say, ask the questions that burned within her, and then decide, deliberately and on her own terms, what place, if any, he would have in her life going forward. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't acceptance of his long absence or the choices he had made. But it was an opening, a willingness to consider possibilities beyond the anger and confusion that had initially overwhelmed her. Lying in the enormous bed, Zora removed the gold locket from her pocket and opened it again, studying the two faces inside. Her mother, young and beautiful and untroubled by the mental illness that would later claim her. And Richard Harrington, younger but recognizable, his eyes containing none of the weariness she had observed on the plane. Her biological parents, captured in a moment before tragedy, before separation, before the complicated sequence of events that had led to her birth and the life she had known until now. Zora closed the locket and placed it on the nightstand. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, new decisions, new steps on this unexpected journey. But for tonight, she had done enough, processed enough, felt enough, decided enough. Sleep came surprisingly easily, carrying her into dreams not of turbulent flights or hospital stretchers or safe deposit boxes, but of a garden much like the one she had observed from Henderson's office window. A secret garden, waiting to be discovered, cultivated, brought back to life through patience, attention, and care. The final day dawned bright and clear over London, sunlight streaming through the gap in the curtains Zora had left partially open. For a moment upon waking, she experienced the brief disorientation of unfamiliar surroundings before the events of the past days came rushing back. The flight, Harrington's collapse, the revelations about her parentage, her mother's letter, the contents of the safe deposit box. She lay still for a moment, taking inventory of her emotional state. The shock and anger that had initially dominated her reactions had receded somewhat, making space for a more complex mix of feelings: curiosity, sadness, cautious hope, and a strange sense of expanded possibility. Her phone chimed with a text message from Henderson. "Mr. Harrington has been cleared to travel. He will arrive in London this evening. Would you like to meet with him tomorrow morning at 10:00 at the office? No pressure, entirely your choice." Zora stared at the message, her heart rate accelerating. The abstract notion of eventually meeting with Harrington was suddenly concrete, immediate. Tomorrow morning, if she agreed, she would sit face to face with her biological father for the first time in her life. After a moment's consideration, she typed back, "Yes, 10:00 is fine." Henderson's response came quickly. "Excellent. I'll make the arrangements. In the meantime, is there anything you'd like to do today? London has much to offer a first-time visitor." The suggestion of tourism, of normal, enjoyable activities amid the emotional intensity of the past days, was appealing. Zora realized she had barely seen anything of the city beyond the route between her hotel, Henderson's office, and the bank. "I'd like to see some of London," she replied, "but I don't know where to start." "Ms. Powell would be happy to accompany you if you're comfortable with that. She's quite knowledgeable about the city." The idea of spending the day with the young lawyer was surprisingly appealing. Ms. Powell had been kind and professional, and her presence would provide structure without the emotional weight that Henderson, as Harrington's longtime associate, might bring to the outing. "That would be nice," Zora texted back. Arrangements were quickly made for Ms. Powell to meet Zora in the hotel lobby at 10:00 a.m. With a few hours to spare, Zora took her time getting ready, calling Grandmommy for their daily check-in, and having a leisurely breakfast in the hotel's elegant dining room. By the time she met Ms. Powell in the lobby, Zora felt refreshed, and despite the looming meeting with Harrington the next day, eager to experience some of the famous city she found herself in. "I thought we might start with some of the classic sights," Ms. Powell suggested as they exited the hotel into the bright June morning. "Unless there's something specific you've always wanted to see." "The British Museum," Zora said without hesitation. "I've read about it in books, all those artifacts from around the world. I'd love to see them in person." Ms. Powell smiled approvingly. "An excellent choice. We'll start there and see where the day takes us." The museum, with its imposing neoclassical facade and vast collection spanning human history and culture, captivated Zora immediately. As they wandered through galleries housing Egyptian mummies, Greek sculptures, and the controversial Elgin marbles, Ms. Powell proved to be a knowledgeable guide, supplementing the museum's information with interesting historical context and occasional amusing anecdotes. "Did you study history?" Zora asked as they paused before the Rosetta Stone, the key that had unlocked the secrets of Egyptian hieroglyphs. "Ancient languages, actually," Ms. Powell replied. "Before law school, my first degree was in classical studies with a focus on linguistics." "Why did you switch to law?" Ms. Powell smiled ruefully. Practicality, I suppose. I loved languages, still do, but there aren't many career paths for someone who can read Linear B and Akkadian. Law offered stability and intellectual challenge, though sometimes I miss the pure scholarship of my university days. The personal revelation, a glimpse of Ms. Powell as more than just Henderson's efficient assistant or Harrington's legal representative, helped Zora relax further in her company. By the time they left the museum for lunch at a nearby cafe, their conversation had evolved from polite tourist chat to something more genuine. Over sandwiches and sparkling water, Zora found herself asking the question that had been on her mind since meeting the young lawyer. "Do you know everything? About me, about Harrington, about why I'm here?" Ms. Powell considered the question carefully before answering. "I know the legal aspects, the trust, the guardianship considerations, the formal arrangements, and I know the basic outline of the personal situation. But no, I don't know everything. Some matters Mr. Henderson handles directly with Mr. Harrington, maintaining their privacy." "What do you think of him? Harrington, I mean." Again, Ms. Powell took her time responding. "I don't know him well personally. In professional contexts, he's demanding but fair. Intelligent, certainly. Driven." She paused, then added more softly, "There's a sadness to him that seems permanent, like a shadow that never quite leaves even on the brightest days." The observation aligned with what Zora had glimpsed of Harrington on the plane and what she had read in his journal entries. A man carrying a profound regret that colored his entire existence. "Are you nervous about meeting him tomorrow?" Ms. Powell asked, turning the conversation back to Zora. "Yes," Zora admitted. "I'm not sure what to say to him or what I want from him, if anything." "You don't have to know that yet," Ms. Powell said gently. "Tomorrow is just a meeting, a chance to see each other as real people, not as concepts or fantasies. Whatever comes after that will develop naturally or not based on how you both feel." The simple framing, tomorrow as a beginning, not a conclusion, helped ease some of the pressure Zora had been placing on herself. She didn't need to decide immediately whether to forgive Harrington, whether to accept him as a father figure, whether to allow him into her life in any meaningful way. She just needed to meet him, to listen, to speak her truth as best she understood it. The rest of the day passed in a pleasant blur of London landmarks, a walk along the Thames, a visit to the Tower of London with its ravens and crown jewels, a ride on the London Eye that offered spectacular views of the city sprawling in all directions. By the time Ms. Powell escorted her back to the hotel in the early evening, Zora felt both physically tired from the walking and emotionally refreshed from the day of normal tourist activities. "Thank you," she said sincerely as they parted in the hotel lobby. "It was exactly what I needed today." "It was my pleasure," Ms. Powell replied with equal sincerity. "You're a remarkable young woman, Zora. Whatever happens tomorrow and beyond, don't forget that." Alone in her suite, Zora ordered room service again and ate while watching British television, a welcome distraction from the thoughts of tomorrow's meeting that kept trying to dominate her attention. After dinner, she called Grandma Mee for their evening check-in, sharing details of her day exploring London and receiving updates on home and the neighborhood. "Harrington arrives tonight," she told her grandmother toward the end of their call. "I'm meeting with him tomorrow morning." "How are you feeling about that?" Grandma Mee asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Nervous, curious, a little angry still," Zora admitted. "But also, I don't know, ready maybe, ready to hear what he has to say, to ask my questions, to see him as a real person instead of just this idea of a father who wasn't there." "That's a mature way to approach it," Grandma Mee said approvingly. "Just remember you don't owe him anything, not your forgiveness, not your love, not your time beyond tomorrow if that's what you decide. You listen to your heart, Zora. It'll tell you what's right for you." "I will," Zora promised. "I love you, Grandma." "Love you too, child. Call me right after you hear." After hanging up, Zora prepared for bed with a strange sense of calm. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. She had survived the initial shock of discovering her true parentage, had read her mother's explanation, had glimpsed Harrington's perspective through his journal entries. Now it was time to face him directly, to begin the process of determining what, if anything, he would mean to her going forward. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams in which she was back on the turbulent plane trying to reach someone. Sometimes Harrington, sometimes her mother, sometimes James Williams, who remained just beyond her grasp despite her desperate efforts. Morning arrived with gray skies and a light drizzle that seemed fitting for the emotional weight of the day ahead. Zora dressed carefully in the same navy blue dress she had worn to the law office on her first day in London, a choice that felt right, coming full circle to face the man whose revelation had set this entire journey in motion. Breakfast remained untouched, her stomach too knotted with anticipation to accommodate food. Instead, she sipped at a cup of tea, watching raindrops trace patterns down the window of her suite as the clock ticked inexorably toward her 10:00 a.m. appointment. At precisely 9:30, she left her room and took the elevator down to the lobby, where Henderson waited to escort her to the office. His expression was kind but unreadable as he greeted her. "Mr. Harrington arrived late last night," he informed her as they walked through the misty London morning. "He's resting at his home but will meet us at the office as arranged." Zora nodded, not trusting her voice at that moment. The reality of the impending meeting had suddenly struck her with full force, sending her heart racing and her palms sweating despite the cool air. "There's something you should know," Henderson continued as they neared the law office. "Richard is still recovering from his cardiac event. He's stable, but the doctors have advised him to avoid stress and excessive emotion. I mention this not to influence your interaction with him, but simply so you're prepared for his physical appearance, which may be somewhat frail compared to when you saw him on the plane." The information added another layer of complexity to the already complicated meeting ahead. Zora had been preparing herself to confront a powerful, wealthy businessman, the commanding presence she had observed in first class. Now she would be meeting a physically vulnerable version of that man, one whose health was still compromised by the very event that had brought them into direct contact. "I understand," she said, finding her voice at last. When they arrived at the law office, Ms. Powell greeted them in the reception area, her manner professional but with a warm smile for Zora. "Mr. Harrington is already here," she informed them. "He's waiting in the small conference room." Henderson turned to Zora. "Would you prefer me to accompany you, or would you rather speak with him alone?" The question gave Zora pause. She had assumed Henderson would be present as a buffer, a mediator of sorts. The idea of facing Harrington completely alone was daunting, yet she recognized that some conversations needed to happen without witnesses, however well-intentioned. I think I'd like to speak with him alone first," she decided. "But maybe you could check on us after a while." "Of course," Henderson agreed. "I'll give you 30 minutes, then come in with some refreshments, a natural break point if you need it." With that arrangement settled, Ms. Powell led Zora to a different conference room than the one they had used previously. A smaller, more intimate space with comfortable armchairs rather than the imposing oval table of the main conference room. She opened the door, announced Zora's arrival, and then discreetly withdrew, leaving Zora standing at the threshold, face to face at last with Richard Harrington. Her first impression was of how right Henderson had been to warn her. The man who rose slowly from an armchair to greet her bore little resemblance to the commanding figure from the plane. Harrington's expensive suit hung slightly loose on his frame, his complexion was ashen beneath its natural pallor, and a new gauntness accentuated the bones of his face. Only his eyes remained unchanged, that same intense blue gaze that had connected with hers across the airplane cabin. "Zora," he said simply, his voice stronger than his appearance would suggest. "Thank you for coming." She entered the room fully but remained standing near the door, maintaining a physical distance that mirrored her emotional guardedness. "Mr. Harrington," she acknowledged with a small nod. "Please sit if you'd like," he gestured to the armchair opposite his own. "Or stand if that's more comfortable for you. This is your meeting. We'll proceed however you wish." The deference, so different from the entitled behavior she had witnessed on the plane, caught Zora off guard. After a moment's hesitation, she moved to the indicated chair and perched on its edge, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Harrington resumed his seat with a slight wince that betrayed ongoing physical discomfort. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other in silence. Biological father and daughter, connected by DNA yet separated by years of absence and secrecy, searching for something recognizable in each other's features. "You look so much like your mother," Harrington finally said, his voice soft with something like wonder. But there's something of me there too, I think. Around the eyes, perhaps, the shape of your hands. Zora glanced down at her hands unconsciously. She had never considered which physical traits might have come from this man rather than from James Williams or her mother. I read Mom's letter, she said, deciding to take control of the conversation. And I saw your journal in the safe deposit box. Harrington nodded, a flash of vulnerability crossing his features. Then you know more about me, about my thoughts, my regrets, than almost anyone else alive. Why? The question emerged more forcefully than Zora had intended, encompassing all the specific questions that had built up within her. Why had he not acknowledged her? Why had he stayed away? Why had he watched from a distance instead of being present? Why was he entering her life now? Harrington seemed to understand the breadth of her question. He sighed deeply, his hands resting on his knees, not relaxed but not clenched either, as if he was consciously controlling his physical response to her challenge. The simple answer, which is both true and entirely inadequate, is fear, he said after a moment. Fear of scandal at first, fear of disrupting my marriage, my career, my carefully constructed life. Later, fear of disrupting yours, the stable home James and your mother had created, the identity they had established for you. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts or perhaps his strength. But the deeper truth, the one I've only recently come to fully acknowledge, is that I was a coward. I chose the path of least resistance, the option that required nothing of me but money, which I had in abundance and could part with easily, rather than the difficult, messy, potentially painful work of being a father to you in any real sense. The raw honesty of his self-assessment surprised Zora. She had expected justifications, perhaps even attempts to shift blame to her mother or grandmother for keeping them apart. Instead, he was owning his choices and their consequences without qualification. Your journal said you watched me grow up, came to school events, drove by our house. The thought still unsettled her deeply. That seems creepy, intrusive. Harrington winced at her characterization but didn't dispute it. I can see how it would appear that way from your perspective. At the time, I told myself I was maintaining a connection, however tenuous. In retrospect, I recognize it was selfish, satisfying my need to see you without taking on any of the responsibilities or risks of being known to you. Did my mom know you were watching us? Not at first, he admitted. Later, when her condition began to deteriorate, she became convinced she was being followed, monitored. The doctors dismissed it as paranoia, a symptom of her illness. The tragedy is that, in this one aspect, she wasn't entirely wrong. I wasn't having her followed in the organized way she imagined, but I was, observing from a distance. The revelation sent a chill through Zora. Had Harrington's covert surveillance contributed to her mother's paranoia, to the mental illness that had eventually taken her away? Did you make her worse? She asked bluntly. By watching us, did you help push her over the edge? Pain flashed across Harrington's face. Genuine pain, not defensive anger at the accusation. I've asked myself that question countless times, he said quietly. Her doctors insist her condition would have manifested regardless of external factors, that the postpartum psychosis that began after your birth created vulnerabilities that were exacerbated by James's death and other stressors. He looked down at his hands. But I cannot say with certainty that my periodic presence, if she ever sensed it, didn't contribute to her distress. It's one of many regrets I carry. Zora absorbed this, trying to reconcile her anger at his potential role in her mother's deterioration with the evident remorse he displayed. Before she could formulate her next question, Harrington continued unprompted. After your mother entered the facility in Arizona, I began visiting her with her doctor's permission and only on days when her condition allowed for it. At first, she refused to see me. Eventually, she agreed to short visits. We've established a kind of truce over the years. Not friendship, certainly, but a mutual recognition of our shared concern for you. You visit my mother? The revelation stunned Zora. Regularly. 4 times a year, Harrington confirmed. I've established a foundation that helps fund the facility where she lives, ensuring she receives the best possible care. It's not atonement, nothing could be, but it's something I can do. This piece of information, that Harrington had maintained a connection with her mother while remaining a shadow in Zora's life, was difficult to process. There was consideration in his actions, yet also a continuing pattern of engagement at a safe distance, involvement without true vulnerability. "Why now?" Zora asked, returning to the question that had burned within her since receiving the mysterious letter summoning her to London. "Why bring me here now after all these years?" "Your grandmother's illness was the catalyst," Harrington acknowledged. "But the truth is, I've been working toward this moment for years, building the trust for your education, establishing relationships with people who could serve as appropriate guardians if needed, gradually preparing for the day when you would learn the truth." He leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "I had planned to wait until you were older, 16 perhaps, or even 18. But when Me's cancer was diagnosed, the timeline accelerated. The prospect of you potentially entering the foster care system if her health failed." He shook his head. "I couldn't allow that." "So what happens now?" Zora asked, the practical question cutting through the emotional complexity of their conversation. "What do you want from me?" Harrington seemed to choose his words with great care. "What I want, what I hope for, is the opportunity to know you and for you to know me. Not as a replacement for James, who will always be your father in the ways that matter most, but as someone who is connected to you, who cares deeply about your welfare and your future." "Like what? Weekends and holidays?" The idea seemed absurd. Dividing her time between Baltimore and wherever this wealthy stranger lived, trying to create a father-daughter relationship from scratch at 12 years old. "No," Harrington shook his head. "I don't have any specific expectations regarding time or arrangement. I'm simply proposing an open door, communication, visits if and when you're comfortable, a gradual building of whatever relationship might be possible given our circumstances." He paused, then added, "I have no legal claim on you, Zora. No court would grant me custody or visitation rights after all this time, nor would I seek such an arrangement against your wishes. This is entirely your choice. You can walk out that door today and never see me again, and the trust will still be there for you, the support for your grandmother's care, the provisions for your future." The lack of pressure of demands was both surprising and somewhat disorienting. Zora had prepared herself for a man attempting to claim her, to insert himself forcefully into her life. Instead, she found someone offering possibilities without requirements, connections without obligations. "I'm still angry," she admitted, the honesty seeming appropriate given his own forthright approach. "About all the years you weren't there, about the secrets, about how everything I thought I knew about myself turns out to be complicated." "Your anger is justified," Harrington said simply. "I don't expect or ask you to set it aside. It's a natural, healthy response to the situation." A knock at the door signaled Henderson's return as promised. He entered carrying a tray with a pot of tea, cups, and a plate of biscuits. "How are we doing?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral as he set the tray on the small table between them. "We're having an honest conversation," Harrington replied, glancing at Zora for confirmation. She nodded slightly. "Yes, honest." "Excellent," Henderson said. "Would either of you like tea, or perhaps some privacy to continue?" Zora realized she was thirsty. The emotional intensity of the conversation had left her mouth dry. "Tea would be nice," she said, "but then I think we need more time to talk, alone." Henderson efficiently poured 2 cups, handed them to Zora and Harrington, and then discreetly withdrew, closing the door softly behind him. The brief interruption had given Zora a moment to gather her thoughts, to move beyond her initial questions to the ones that probed deeper into who this man was, what place he might have in her life. "Tell me about yourself," she said, surprising both Harrington and herself with the request. "Not about your relationship with my mother or your feelings about me. Tell me who you are." Harrington seemed momentarily taken aback by the shift, but then a small smile touched his lips, the first she had seen from him. "That's a fair request," he acknowledged, "though I warn you I'm not particularly interesting beyond my work." "Tell me anyway," Zora insisted. "If you want any kind of relationship with me, I need to know who I'd be relating to." Harrington nodded, accepting the logic of her position. Over the next 20 minutes as they sipped their tea, he shared the outline of his life, born to upper-middle-class parents in Connecticut, educated at Phillips Exeter and then Harvard, married young to Elizabeth, his college girlfriend from a similarly privileged background. 2 children from that marriage. A son, Michael, now 37, and a daughter, Sarah, 35, both successful professionals with families of their own. The founding of his technology company in the early days of personal computing, its growth into a major corporation, the wealth and influence that had followed. The gradual estrangement from his wife despite maintaining the appearance of a solid marriage. His sister, Catherine, the family rebel who had chosen education over business, teaching literature at Georgetown University for nearly 3 decades. "Catherine is the better one of us," he said with genuine affection. "More courageous, more authentic. She's known about you from the beginning, the only person in my family who does. She's been my conscience on this matter, consistently arguing that I should acknowledge you, be part of your life." "Does she have children?" Zora asked, curious about these unknown relatives. "No, she never married, never wanted children of her own. But she's been a devoted aunt to Michael's and Sarah's children, and she would be to you as well if you're ever interested in meeting her." As Harrington spoke of his life, Zora found herself listening not just to the content, but to the manner of his telling, what he emphasized, what he glossed over, what seemed to bring him pride or regret. The portrait that emerged was of a man who had achieved everything society defined as success, while missing something essential in human connection and authenticity. "Are you happy?" she asked suddenly, interrupting his description of his company's latest technological innovations. The question clearly caught him off guard. He set down his teacup slowly, considering his response with the same care he had given all her previous questions. "No," he said finally, the single word heavy with realization. "I am respected. I am successful by conventional metrics. I am comfortable in material terms. But happy? No, I don't believe I am or have been for many years." The simple honesty of his answer moved something in Zora. Not forgiveness exactly, but a flicker of empathy for this man who had everything and nothing simultaneously. "What about you?" Harrington asked, turning the question back to her. "Are you happy, Zora?" She considered the question seriously, thinking about her life in Baltimore with Grandma Mee, her school where she excelled academically but often felt isolated socially, the community center programs that provided structure and opportunity amid the challenges of her neighborhood. "Sometimes," she answered truthfully, "when I'm reading a good book, or when Grandma Mee isn't too sick and we watch old movies together, or when I solve a really hard math problem that no one else in class can figure out." She paused, then added, "But sometimes I'm lonely. Sometimes I wish things were different." Harrington nodded, not offering platitudes or promises to fix everything, just acknowledging her truth as she had acknowledged his. "What happens after this meeting?" Zora asked, bringing them back to the practical questions that would shape whatever came next. "I'm supposed to go back to Baltimore tomorrow." "That's still the plan unless you wish to extend your stay," Harrington confirmed. "Henderson has arranged your return flight. Your grandmother is expecting you home." "And then what, between us, I mean?" Harrington leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "That depends entirely on what you want, Zora. If you'd like, we could establish regular communication, phone calls, emails, perhaps video chats. I travel to the East Coast frequently for business. I could visit Baltimore occasionally, take you to lunch or an activity you enjoy, get to know you gradually in an environment where you feel comfortable and secure." The proposal was modest, reasonable, a starting point rather than a grand restructuring of her life. Zora found herself considering it seriously. "And if Grandma Mee gets sicker," she pressed, needing clarity on this point, "what happens then?" "As Henderson explained, there are several options, all of which would be discussed with you and your grandmother before any decisions were made. Catherine is one possibility. Ms. Jenkins, whom your mother trusted, is another. My home would be open to you as well, though I recognize that would be a dramatic change from everything familiar." He hesitated, then added, "I want you to know that whatever happens with your grandmother's health, you will not be alone, Zora. There are people prepared to care for you, to ensure your education continues uninterrupted, to provide stability during difficult times. Whether I am one of those people is your choice, but the support system exists regardless." The reassurance echoed what her grandmother had told her, reinforcing the sense that despite the upheaval of these revelations, she was not adrift, not without resources or care. A complex mix of emotions washed through Zora as she sat across from this man who was simultaneously a stranger and her closest blood relative. Anger still simmered beneath the surface, but it was joined now by curiosity, cautious interest, and the first tentative wisps of something that might, with time and care, evolve into connection. "I think," she said slowly, measuring each word, "that I would like to try the phone calls, maybe emails too, just to see if there's anything here worth building on." The relief and hope that crossed Harrington's face was unmistakable, though he quickly modulated his expression, clearly not wanting to overwhelm her with his reaction. "I would like that very much," he said simply. "But I need you to understand something," Zora continued, her voice strengthening with conviction. "James Williams was my father. That doesn't change no matter what DNA says, no matter what relationship we might or might not develop. He chose me, loved me, was there for me. That matters more than biology." "I agree completely," Harrington said without hesitation. "James was a better man than I in the ways that truly count. He earned the title of father through his actions, his presence, his love. I would never presume to replace him in your heart or your life." The acknowledgement of James's rightful place in her life eased something in Zora's chest that had been tight since the moment Harrington had whispered, "I'm your father," on that turbulent flight. "So what do I call you?" she asked, the practical question suddenly important. "Not Dad. I'm not ready for that, maybe never will be." "Richard is fine," he said. "Or Mr. Harrington, if that feels more comfortable for now. We can figure out the rest as we go along if you're willing." Zora nodded, a tacit agreement to this tentative beginning. "I'd like to see my mother," she said, changing the subject. "After I go home, Grandmommy said we could visit her in Arizona." "I'll make all the necessary arrangements," Harrington promised. "The facility requires advance notice, and her doctors will need to assess whether she's stable enough for a visit, but I'll ensure everything is prepared as soon as possible." Another knock at the door heralded Henderson's return. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, "but it's been nearly 2 hours, and Mr. Harrington's doctor was quite explicit about limiting stressful activities." Zora was startled to realize how much time had passed. The conversation had absorbed her completely, the minutes and hours flowing unnoticed as she and Harrington navigated the complex terrain between them. "Of course," she said, rising from her chair, "I should let you rest." Harrington stood as well, moving more stiffly than before, the physical toll of the extended conversation evident in his posture and pallor. "Thank you, Zora," he said quietly, "for hearing me out, for your honesty, for considering the possibility of some connection going forward." Zora nodded, uncertain how to end this momentous meeting. A handshake seemed too formal, a hug unimaginably premature. In the end, she simply said, "I'll talk to you soon," the ordinary phrase carrying the weight of extraordinary circumstances. As Henderson escorted her from the room, Zora glanced back once to see Harrington lowering himself carefully back into his chair, his expression a complex mixture of exhaustion and something that looked, surprisingly, like peace. If you're finding this story as compelling as millions of others have, take a moment to subscribe now. In the next part, we'll discover what happens when Zora returns home to Baltimore and visits her mother in Arizona. Will she build a relationship with Richard Harrington? What secrets still remain to be uncovered? Subscribe and comment below with your thoughts. The return to Baltimore carried none of the turbulence or drama of the flight that had brought Zora to London. No medical emergencies, no frightening weather, no life-altering revelations mid-journey. Just the steady hum of engines, occasional announcements from the captain, and the routine service of meals and drinks as the aircraft made its way across the Atlantic. Zora spent most of the flight reading, finding comfort in the familiar escape of literature as she processed all that had occurred in the past week. Before her departure, Henderson had given her a sealed envelope containing the key details of her trust fund, contact information for both himself and Harrington, and most precious of all, her mother's original letter, which she had asked to keep. "Your grandmother will meet you at baggage claim," Henderson had informed her during their final meeting. "Mr. Harrington wanted to see you off at the airport, but felt his presence might complicate your departure. He asked me to convey his regards and to remind you that all arrangements going forward will proceed at your pace, according to your comfort." The consideration was both a relief and, oddly, a slight disappointment. Part of Zora had wanted to see Harrington once more before leaving London, to confirm that their conversation had been real, that the tentative connection they had established wasn't just a product of the intense, artificial environment of the law office. But perhaps this was better, a clean break between the revelations of London and her return to normal life in Baltimore, with space to integrate what she had learned before navigating whatever came next. As the plane began its descent into Baltimore, Zora felt a surge of mixed emotions: excitement to see her grandmother, anxiety about how their relationship might be different now that secrets had been revealed, uncertainty about how to incorporate the new knowledge of her parentage into her existing identity and daily life. The sight of Grandmommy waiting at baggage claim, thinner than when Zora had left, wearing her Sunday church hat despite it being a Wednesday, clutching her purse with both hands as she scanned the arriving passengers, brought tears to Zora's eyes. Whatever complications had been introduced into her life by the revelations in London, this fundamental relationship remained her anchor, her true north. "Grandma," she called, breaking into a run as soon as she cleared the security barrier. "There's my girl." Grandmommy opened her arms, enfolding Zora in an embrace that smelled of familiar perfume and home. "Lord, I missed you something fierce." "I missed you too," Zora said, her voice muffled against her grandmother's shoulder. They held each other for a long moment, neither speaking, both absorbing the comfort of reunion after a separation that had encompassed far more than physical distance. "Let's get your bag and head home," Grandmommy said finally, keeping one arm around Zora's shoulders as they moved toward the baggage carousel. "Mrs. Jenkins from next door made her famous chicken and dumplings for your homecoming dinner." The casual mention of ordinary life, neighbors, home-cooked meals, familiar routines, was exactly what Zora needed after the surreal intensity of her time in London. As they collected her suitcase and made their way to the parking lot where Mr. Robinson, their church deacon, waited to drive them home, she felt herself beginning to relax, to settle back into herself. The drive through Baltimore's streets was a study in contrasts after London's manicured wealth. Abandoned buildings with boarded windows stood alongside vibrant community centers and carefully maintained row houses with flower boxes. Children played in spraying fire hydrants to escape the summer heat. Old men gathered on stoops to play chess. Mothers called to children as evening approached. This was her world, complex, challenging, but familiar and, in its way, beautiful. When they turned onto their street, Zora was surprised to see a small welcome committee gathered on their front steps. Mrs. Jenkins from next door, Mr. Jin from the corner store, Zora's best friend Tanya and her mother, Pastor Green from their church. A hand-painted banner hung from the porch railing. "Welcome home, Zora." "What's all this?" she asked, a lump forming in her throat at the unexpected display of community care. "Just folks who missed you," Grandmommy said simply. "Word got around you were coming home today." The simple gathering, neighbors sharing food on paper plates, Tanya eagerly asking about London, Pastor Green offering a brief prayer of thanks for safe travels, was as far from the rarefied atmosphere of Henderson's law office or the Claridge Hotel as could be imagined. Yet it was here, among these people who knew her, had watched her grow, had supported her and her grandmother through difficult times, that Zora felt most herself. Later, after the neighbors had departed and the house was quiet except for the familiar sounds of Grandmommy washing dishes in the kitchen, Zora sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies begin to emerge in the gathering dusk. The weight of her experiences in London, the revelations about her parentage, the meeting with Harrington, the letter from her mother, seemed simultaneously enormous and somehow manageable in the context of home. Grandmommy joined her on the swing, the wooden slats creaking slightly beneath their combined weight. For a while, they simply rocked in comfortable silence, the rhythm soothing and familiar. "You want to talk about it?" Grandmommy finally asked. "About him, about what happens now?" Zora considered the question, sorting through the tangle of thoughts and feelings that had accompanied her home from London. "I told him I'd try phone calls," she said. "Maybe emails, just to see if there's anything there, anything worth building on." Grandmommy nodded, neither approving nor disapproving, simply acknowledging Zora's decision. "And how do you feel about that?" "Confused," Zora admitted. "Part of me is still angry, at him for not being there all these years, at Mom for keeping the truth from me, even at you sometimes." She glanced sideways at her grandmother, worried about causing hurt with her honesty. But Grandmommy simply nodded again. "That's fair," she said. "Anger's a natural response to finding out you've been lied to, even when the lies came from a place of love and protection." "But another part of me is curious," Zora continued, relieved by her grandmother's acceptance of her complicated feelings. "About him, about that side of my family, about what it might be like to have. I don't know more people in my corner." "That's natural too," Grandmommy assured her. "Family's complicated, Zora. Always has been, always will be. It's not just blood that makes a family, it's choice, commitment, showing up day after day. James showed up for you. I've tried to show up for you. This Harrington fellow, he's just starting that journey, and whether it leads anywhere meaningful is something only time will tell." The simple wisdom, delivered without judgment or agenda, helped clarify Zora's own thinking. "I don't have to decide everything right now, do I?" she asked. "Lord, no," Grandmommy chuckled. "You're 12 years old, child. You've got your whole life ahead to figure out what Richard Harrington means to you, what kind of relationship you want with him, if any at all. Take your time. Listen to your heart. The right path will make itself known." They rocked in silence for a while longer, the familiar sounds of their neighborhood at nightfall, distant sirens, children being called indoors, a car stereo thumping bass as it passed, creating a backdrop to their quiet communion. "We're still going to see Mom, right?" Zora asked eventually. "In Arizona." "Yes, indeed," Grandmommy confirmed. "Harrington called while you were in the air. He's made all the arrangements. If the doctors give their approval, we'll fly out next month." The prospect of seeing her mother after 5 years of absence, and now with the context of her mental illness and the truth about Zora's parentage, was both exciting and terrifying. Would her mother recognize her? Would she be lucid enough for meaningful conversation? Would seeing her help heal the wound of her departure or simply reopen it? "What's she like now?" Zora asked softly. "When you talk to her on the phone?" Grandmommy considered the question carefully. "She has good days and harder days. On the good days, she's almost like her old self, curious, intelligent, full of questions about you and your life. On the harder days, she gets confused, sometimes paranoid, sometimes just disconnected from reality." "Does she know about Harrington contacting me, about me learning the truth?" "Yes, I told her after your first call from London. She was having a good day, thankfully. She was worried about how you'd take it, but also relieved, I think. Carrying secrets is a heavy burden, especially for someone whose mind is already fragile." The knowledge that her mother was aware of these developments, had processed them in her own way, added another layer to Zora's evolving understanding of her family situation. It wasn't just about her and Harrington anymore, or even about her, Harrington, and Grandmommy. Her mother remained a part of this constellation, however distant and complicated her presence might be. "Do you think we'll ever be a normal family?" Zora asked, immediately recognizing the naivety of the question even as it left her lips. Grandmommy smiled gently. "Child, there's no such thing as a normal family. Every family has its complications, its secrets, its wounds and healings. Some just hide them better than others." She patted Zora's hand. "But if you're asking whether we'll find our way to something that feels right, that provides you with the support and love you deserve, yes, I believe we will. It might not look like what you imagined, might include some people you never expected, might exclude others you thought would always be there. But we'll find our way." The simple assurance, offered without false promises or platitudes, comforted Zora more than any elaborate guarantees could have. As the fireflies danced in the growing darkness and the porch swing creaked its steady rhythm, she felt a tentative peace settling over her. Not resolution or certainty, but the beginnings of acceptance, of integration, of moving forward with new knowledge rather than remaining frozen in shock or anger. Later that night, as she prepared for bed in her familiar room with its faded butterfly wallpaper and shelves overflowing with books, Zora found the gold locket Harrington had left in the safe deposit box. She had packed it almost as an afterthought, neither wanting to wear it nor willing to leave it behind in London. She opened it carefully, studying the two young faces inside, her mother's dimpled smile, Harrington's confident gaze. Two people whose brief connection, whatever its nature, had resulted in her existence. Two people who, despite their subsequent choices, had shaped her life in profound ways, one through presence and then absence, the other through distance and now tentative approach. After a moment's contemplation, Zora placed the locket in her keepsake box alongside other treasured items. A photo of herself with James Williams on her 4th birthday, a pressed flower from her mother's garden, the ribbon from her first spelling bee victory. Not prominently displayed, not rejected or hidden away, but simply incorporated into the collection of artifacts that represented her complex, evolving story. As she drifted toward sleep in her own bed for the first time in over a week, Zora felt a curious sense of expansion rather than confusion. The truth, however complicated and initially painful, had created space for new possibilities, new connections, new understandings of herself and her place in the world. The journey ahead would not be simple or straightforward, but she was no longer walking it in the dark, guided only by half-truths and protective fictions. Whatever came next, the planned visit to her mother, the tentative communication with Harrington, the ongoing navigation of her identity in light of these revelations. She would face it with open eyes and the support of those who loved her, in all their imperfect human ways. The promised visit to Arizona materialized 4 weeks later, as July's heat pressed down on Baltimore like a physical weight. The arrangements, as Harrington had promised, were comprehensive. First-class tickets for Zora and Grandma Me, a comfortable hotel near the treatment facility, a rental car with driver to eliminate logistical concerns. In the intervening weeks, Zora had received 2 carefully composed emails from Harrington, asking about her readjustment to home, sharing small details about his own life, never pressuring or overwhelming her with expectations. She had responded with equal care, brief but not dismissive, sharing selected aspects of her summer activities while maintaining boundaries around her more personal thoughts and feelings. The facility where her mother resided was nothing like the institutional setting Zora had imagined based on TV shows and movies. Located on the outskirts of Sedona, it resembled a luxury resort more than a hospital. Low adobe buildings nestled against red rock formations, flowering desert plants lining winding paths, a sense of tranquility pervading the carefully designed spaces. "Your mother is having a good day," Dr. Littlefeather, the psychiatrist who had overseen Eliza's care for the past 5 years, informed them after their initial orientation. "She's been preparing for your visit for weeks, working with her therapist to manage her emotions, practicing grounding techniques to help her stay present." Will she know me?" Zora asked, the question that had kept her awake on the flight west finally finding voice. Dr. Littlefeather's expression was kind but honest. "Yes, she'll know you, Zora. Her memory isn't the issue. She remembers you clearly and speaks of you often. The challenge is maintaining connection to present reality when emotions become overwhelming. If she begins to seem distant or confused during your visit, it's not because she doesn't recognize you or care. It's simply her mind's way of protecting itself from emotional overload." The explanation helped prepare Zora for the moment when, after being escorted through a sunlit atrium filled with indoor plants and quiet seating areas, she first saw her mother after 5 years of absence. Eliza Williams sat in a small garden courtyard, her back to the entrance, apparently absorbed in sketching something on a pad balanced on her knees. She was thinner than Zora remembered, her once close-cropped hair now grown out into silver-streaked curls that caught the Arizona sunlight. But when she turned at the sound of their approach, the familiar dimple appeared in her right cheek, the same dimple Zora saw in her own mirror each morning. "Zora," her mother breathed, the sketch pad sliding forgotten from her lap as she stood. "Oh my God, look at you." The 5 years of separation, the revelations about Harrington, the complicated history that had led to this moment, all seemed to condense into the simple fact of physical presence. Her mother was here, solid and real, looking at her with eyes that held clear recognition and love. "Mom," Zora managed, the single syllable carrying years of longing, confusion, anger, and hope. They moved toward each other slowly, neither rushing the moment that had been so long in coming. When they finally embraced, Zora found herself cataloging sensory details. The lavender scent of her mother's shampoo, different from the coconut she remembered from childhood. The surprising boniness of her shoulders beneath the loose cotton dress. The slight tremor in her hands as they came to rest on Zora's back. "You've grown so much," Eliza said as they separated enough to look at each other properly. "You're not my little girl anymore." "I'm still me," Zora said, suddenly desperate to reassure her mother that the connection between them remained despite the years and revelations. Yes, you are, Eliza agreed, her eyes drinking in every detail of Zora's face. Still my brave, brilliant girl, just taller now, more yourself. Grandma Mie had remained slightly apart during this initial reunion, allowing mother and daughter their moment. Now she stepped forward, her own emotions evident in the slight trembling of her chin despite her composed expression. Eliza, she said softly, you're looking well. Mama, Eliza acknowledged, reaching out one hand while keeping the other on Zora's shoulder, as if afraid she might disappear if not maintained in physical contact. Thank you for bringing her, for taking care of her all these years. The 3 generations of William's women stood in a triangle of connection, each bearing the marks of the complicated journey that had brought them to this sun-drenched garden in Arizona. Grandma Mie's resilience despite illness and hardship, Eliza's fragility and hard-won stability, Zora's emerging understanding of her place within this complex family constellation. Shall we sit? Eliza suggested, gesturing to a small grouping of comfortable chairs arranged beneath a pergola draped with desert vines. I've been looking forward to this for so long. The conversation that followed was both ordinary and extraordinary, updates on Zora's schooling, stories from the neighborhood, questions about the facility and Eliza's daily life there. Beneath the surface of these mundane exchanges ran deeper currents, the unspoken acknowledgement of years lost, of truths recently revealed, of relationships forever altered by absence and revelation. You know about Richard now? Eliza said eventually, addressing directly what had been hovering at the edges of their conversation. You've met him. Zora nodded. On the plane and then in London, we've emailed a few times since I got back home. Are you angry with me? The question was direct, Eliza's gaze steady despite the vulnerability it revealed. For not telling you the truth from the beginning. The question was one Zora had anticipated, had rehearsed answers for during sleepless nights preparing for this visit. Yet now, face to face with her mother in this peaceful garden, the carefully constructed responses seemed inadequate. I was, she said honestly. When I first found out, I was really angry at you, at Grandma, at Harrington, at everyone who knew the truth and kept it from me. Eliza nodded, accepting this without defensiveness. That's fair. But now, Zora paused, searching for words to express her evolving feelings. Now I think I understand better why you made the choices you did, not just about Harrington, but about leaving too, about the facility. I never wanted to leave you, Eliza said, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. That was the hardest decision I've ever made, but I was becoming dangerous, not physically, but emotionally. My paranoia, my episodes. They were creating an environment that wasn't healthy for you. I know that now, Zora said softly. I didn't understand then, I just felt abandoned. Grandma Mie reached over to take one of Zora's hands. We thought we were protecting you, she said, both from Richard's absence and from the full truth about your mother's condition. Looking back, I see we might have found better ways to help you understand, even at a young age. The acknowledgement, not an apology exactly, but a recognition that different choices might have been possible, helped ease something that had remained tight in Zora's chest despite the weeks of processing these revelations. Do you want Richard in your life? Eliza asked directly, returning to the question that had hovered between them. Because whatever happened between him and me, whatever choices were made before and after you were born, that decision belongs to you now. Not to me, not to him, not to anyone else. The framing of the question, centered on Zora's agency rather than adult expectations or preferences, reflected a respect for her autonomy that felt new and significant. I don't know yet, Zora answered truthfully. We're exploring, I guess, emails, phone calls, taking it slowly. Eliza nodded, her expression thoughtful. That sounds wise. Richard is complicated, flawed as we all are, but in specific ways shaped by privilege and power. Yet there is goodness in him too, a capacity for care that gets buried under layers of caution and control. The balanced assessment, neither demonizing Harrington nor excusing his past actions, helped Zora see her biological father through a more nuanced lens than either his self-flagellating journal entries or her own initial anger had permitted. He visits you, Zora said, the revelation from her meeting with Harrington still a source of surprise. Regularly. Yes, Eliza confirmed. 4 times a year like clockwork. At first I refused to see him. Eventually I agreed, partly out of curiosity, partly because the structure of this place makes such encounters safe, controlled. What do you talk about? Zora couldn't imagine what conversations might occur between her mother and the man who had once abandoned her, now reconnected through the shared concern for a daughter one had raised and the other had watched from a distance. You primarily, Eliza smiled slightly. He brings photos sometimes, school events he's attended covertly, community center activities, ordinary moments captured from a distance. We talk about your development, your education, your future. It's the one subject on which we have always been aligned, the desire to see you thrive, even if we've had very different roles in making that possible. The image of these two people, her biological parents, separated by circumstance, choice, and illness, finding common ground in their concern for her welfare was both touching and slightly unnerving. All these years, while she had been unaware of Harrington's existence, her parents had been maintaining this strange, distant connection centered on her. Do you think, Zora began, then hesitated, uncertain how to phrase the question that had formed in her mind. Do I think you should forgive him? Eliza guessed, her perception still acute despite her illness. Give him a chance to be part of your life in some capacity. Zora nodded, grateful not to have to articulate the complex question herself. I think, Eliza said carefully, that forgiveness is never an obligation but always a possibility, and that relationships, when approached with clear eyes and appropriate boundaries, can be sources of growth and healing rather than just potential disappointment or harm. She reached for Zora's free hand, creating a physical connection between the three of them. But what I think doesn't matter nearly as much as what you feel, what you need. Trust yourself, Zora. You have good instincts, a strong heart. Whatever you decide about Richard, or about me for that matter, I will support your choice. The unconditional support, offered without agenda or expectation, was perhaps the greatest gift her mother could have given her in that moment. Not answers or directions, but faith in Zora's capacity to find her own path through the complex terrain of family, identity, and belonging. They spent the remainder of the afternoon together, walking the facility's grounds, sharing a meal in the common dining area where other residents greeted Eliza with evident affection, looking through a book of artwork Eliza had created during her years of treatment. Throughout, Zora observed her mother closely, noting moments when her focus seemed to drift briefly before she would consciously bring herself back to the present with visible effort. As the visit drew to a close, with Dr. Littlefeather discreetly signaling that Eliza was approaching her limit for sustained interaction, Zora felt both fulfilled and hungry for more. Grateful for these precious hours with her mother, yet acutely aware of all the ordinary moments of connection they had missed and would continue to miss. Can I come back? She asked as they prepared to say goodbye in the same garden where they had reunited hours earlier. Visit again. I would like that very much, Eliza said, her voice steady though her eyes revealed the emotional toll of the day. Dr. Littlefeather thinks regular visits might be possible now that we've established this initial connection, perhaps not frequent given the distance and my variable condition, but periodic, something to build on. The prospect of incorporating these visits into her life, creating a relationship with her mother that acknowledged the limitations of her illness while nurturing the love and connection that remained, gave Zora a sense of possibility she hadn't allowed herself to feel since her mother's departure 5 years earlier. Their goodbye was tearful but not devastating, a temporary separation rather than the indefinite abandonment Zora had experienced as a 7-year-old. As they embraced one final time, Eliza whispered in her ear, "Remember who you are, Zora, not just my daughter or James's daughter or even Richard's biological child. You are yourself, unique, complete, worthy of love from all directions. Never forget that." The words stayed with Zora as she and Grandma Mee left the facility, traveled back to their hotel, and eventually boarded their flight home to Baltimore the following day. They were a talisman against the confusion that still sometimes threatened to overwhelm her when she considered the complex web of relationships and revelations that had transformed her understanding of herself and her family. Over the months that followed, a new pattern gradually established itself in Zora's life, one that incorporated her expanded awareness of her origins and the tentative new connections that awareness had made possible. Emails and occasional phone calls with Harrington continued, evolving slowly from careful politeness to more genuine exchanges. In November, he visited Baltimore for the first time, meeting Zora for lunch at a restaurant near her school. The encounter was awkward at times but not unpleasant, laying groundwork for further connection without forcing intimacy neither was ready for. Quarterly visits to Arizona became part of Zora's life, sometimes with Grandma Me, sometimes, as her grandmother's health stabilized and her own comfort with travel increased, on her own, with all arrangements handled seamlessly by Henderson's office. These visits with her mother were sometimes joyful, sometimes challenging when Eliza's condition temporarily worsened, but always valuable in rebuilding a relationship that had been interrupted but never truly severed. Grandma Me remained her rock, her daily constant, the person who knew her most completely and loved her most unconditionally. As Zora's understanding of adult complexity and human frailty deepened, her appreciation for her grandmother's steadfast presence grew correspondingly. In March, shortly after Zora's 13th birthday, Harrington asked if she would be interested in meeting his sister, Catherine. The meeting, arranged at a museum in Washington, D.C. that featured an exhibition on African-American artists, proved unexpectedly significant. Catherine Harrington Brooks, with her direct manner, infectious laugh, and evident joy in finally meeting her niece, connected with Zora in ways her brother had not yet managed. "He's trying, you know," Catherine said as they sat in the museum cafe after viewing the exhibition. "In his emotionally constipated way. This is uncharted territory for him, vulnerability, reaching out, risking rejection." "Did you always know about me?" Zora asked, comfortable enough with her aunt after just a few hours to broach the subject directly. "From the beginning," Catherine confirmed. "I was the one person Richard confided in when Eliza first told him she was pregnant. I urged him to leave his marriage, to acknowledge you publicly, to be a real father." She shook her head ruefully. "He wasn't ready then to make those choices. It's taken him years to evolve into someone capable of truly putting another's needs before his own comfort and convenience." The insight into Harrington's journey, not as justification for his absence, but as context for his current efforts, helped Zora see her biological father with greater clarity. Not a villain or a hero, but a flawed human who had made selfish choices and was now, belatedly, attempting to make different ones. When summer arrived again, marking a year since the fateful flight that had begun this journey of discovery, Zora found herself sitting on the porch swing with Grandma Me, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk, just as they had upon her return from London 12 months earlier. "How you doing with all of it?" Grandma Me asked, the creaking rhythm of the swing underlining the familiar question. "With Richard, with your mother, with everything that's changed this past year?" Zora considered the question seriously, taking stock of her emotional landscape in a way that had become habitual during this year of adaptation and growth. "I think I'm okay," she said finally. "Not perfectly fine, not completely healed or whatever, but okay, finding my way." "That's all any of us can do," Grandma Me said approvingly. "Find our way day by day with the people and circumstances we're given." "I've been thinking about forgiveness," Zora said after a moment of companionable silence. "Not just forgiving Harrington, Richard, for not being there all those years, but forgiving Mom for leaving, even though I understand better now why she felt she had to. Forgiving you for keeping secrets, even though you thought you were protecting me." Grandma Me nodded, listening without interruption. "And I've realized something," Zora continued. "Forgiveness isn't just something you give to other people, it's something you give to yourself too. Permission to move forward without carrying all the hurt and anger, even when the hurt and anger were justified." The insight, hard-won through months of processing her complex family situation, felt significant, a milestone in her ongoing journey toward integration and healing. "That's wisdom beyond your years, child," Grandma Me said softly. "The kind that can only come through living through hard things and finding your way to the other side." As they continued rocking in comfortable silence, Zora reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had begun 1 year ago when she boarded a plane as one person and disembarked as another. Not fundamentally changed in her essence, but expanded in her understanding of herself and the complex web of relationships that had shaped her existence. James Williams was still her father in the ways that mattered most, the man who had chosen her, loved her, given her his name and his protection for the precious years they had together. Her mother remained a complex presence in her life, physically distant due to her illness, but emotionally reconnected through their quarterly visits and the healing they offered both of them. And Richard Harrington. He was becoming something Zora hadn't initially believed possible. Not a replacement father, never that, but a significant adult in her life who contributed value, perspective, and a different kind of care than she had known before. Their relationship was still evolving, still finding its unique shape, but it had moved beyond the anger and confusion of their initial reconnection to something with potential for mutual growth and understanding. The poor 12-year-old black girl from Baltimore and the wealthy white businessman who had watched her from a distance for years had found, in the aftermath of a dramatic mid-air revelation, not a conventional father-daughter relationship, but something perhaps more authentic, a connection based on truth, choice, and growing mutual respect rather than obligation or romanticized ideals of family. As night settled fully over the neighborhood and the fireflies performed their luminous dance against the darkness, Zora felt a deep sense of peace, not because all questions had been answered or all wounds fully healed, but because she had found her way to a place where the complications of her origins and the revelations of the past year had been incorporated into a more complete understanding of herself and her place in the world. The whispered words that had once made her cry, "I'm your father," no longer held the power to shatter her sense of identity. Instead, they had become simply one truth among many, one strand in the complex tapestry of connections, choices, and circumstances that had shaped her life and would continue to inform her future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many as she navigated adolescence, her grandmother's health, her mother's ongoing illness, and her evolving relationship with Harrington, Zora faced them now with eyes open to both the pain and the possibility inherent in human connection. The journey that had begun in turbulence and revelation continued in a different key, not without difficulty or occasional setbacks, but with a hard-won wisdom that would serve her well in all the chapters yet to come. If you found this story moving, please subscribe to our channel for more extraordinary true stories that explore the complexities of family, identity, and unexpected connections. Drop a comment below sharing what resonated most with you about Zora's journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts.